No,
I think we're live now still.
Yeah, we're live.
Yeah. This is the COE after show, talk show, breakdown. Is it live? Yeah. My thing says offline, fam. One sec. Let me just go to my YouTube page. Yeah, we live still. Yeah. This is the a show titled Making Sense of Today's Yellow Vest UK Protest. That's exactly what I want to do still. Me, myself, I'm not that politically aware. So yeah, I want to up the levels, man. I want to know what's going on in the world, our place in it, and give everyone a better understanding as well at the same time, in it. So obviously today I was there with Scattered Minds. He was doing the presenting.
Yeah, debut, superstar, presenter.
Bumped into Steve out there with the far right.
Steady there.
Looking comfortable.
Yeah, I felt one jab in my back, fam. I turned around and see Steve there, man. I'm joking.
You might clarify what you mean by jabbing in the back.
No homo.
No homo.
Gave me a punch. He punched me in the back. Like, yeah, bap, all that. What are you doing there? You called me far right.
Yeah. Exactly.
I said, yeah, we're gonna have to do a show, man, and like just summarize the day's events, in it, make sense of it for people who don't really know. Cause like I said, my political awareness level ain't as up there as it used to be. So if you want to start out, Scattered Minds, let's give a breakdown of what today was about.
Yeah, cool. I'll give a little breakdown. So today was a yellow vest protest, and it kind of caught me by surprise because in all my reading about this protest coming up to it, it was a lot of talk about the quote unquote far right, James Goodard, and a lot of those guys, and they seem to be really the yellow vest camp that the media were interested in talking about. But when we got there today, I saw mainly left-wing banners. I saw some, pro-Brexit, but mainly Labour, Unite, Unison protesters, and this was by BBC. And as we made our way down, we saw, it became apparent that it was definitely a left-wing protest in which they were trying to emulate the yellow vest protest in France, because they see the yellow vest as being the vest of the working class worker. And so they had this idea that they were going to, take on this French idea and try and protest and say enough's enough, end austerity, give us a general election, no, let's remain, and also let's leave. So it was kind of a mixed message coming out from that camp, but it was generally peaceful. And so that kind of also was surprising, because when I was reading up into coming up to the protest, I was reading up about definitely more aggression. It was supposed to be, the belief was that the yellow vest protest was supposed to be a lot more of an aggressive protest, a lot more of a demanding protest, a lot more about give us what we are asking for now, in the same way the French did. And the French protest has been going on for like 9 weeks now. I think it started on 17th of September. I'm not sure exactly, but it's been going on for about 9 weeks now. And they've won concessions in France. The government has backed down. They've changed laws. They've cancelled the fuel rise that it was going to put in. And so it would seem if you want the government to listen to you, you're going to have to get a bit aggressive and do long-term protesting. And that's not what we really saw today. It did get a bit more spicy towards the end when some of the right wingers came on, or some of them they weren't right wing, but the Red Cap Boy was the main one who we saw. There was also Danny Tomo, but he was like smoke, man. We saw him 1 minute, then he was gone again, then he came back again, then he was gone again. And obviously he was winding up Owen Jones. But yeah, the right wing, they didn't have as big of a protest from that sort of right wing side or camp. There wasn't as many people as there was on that left camp. But overall, I think that was probably the most interesting part. That's probably going to be the part the media talk about most, is the clash or the attempt to infiltrate the stage from some of the, I think one of them was called Class War, was one of the protest groups that tried to infiltrate the stage. But yeah, for me, the most interesting part was the last parts there, when we got to some of those debates and some of those conversations at the end. And I think for the protest itself, if the left-wing yellow vest movement wants to have impact, they're going to have to do a lot more than that.
Yeah. Steve, give your breakdown of today's events.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to last week because they actually did a yellow vest march around London last week that was coordinated by James Goddard, and it was the same theme, predominantly Brexit, and marching around London, crossing bridges, and blocking roads. But the specific reason I want to said about last week because they kind of started off Parliament Square and went up Whitehall. They went up a bit up Regent Street, but then they turned back down. And when they reached Trafalgar, or the bottom bit of Trafalgar Square, they bumped into another protest, which was a load of women and men from Cameroon, who I think they were from South Cameroon. And they were protesting about some of the shit that's going on in Cameroon at the moment. So if you think about that, a load of predominantly white working class people going out on a Brexit march, who the media and everyone calls racist, far right, Nazis, etc., bumping into a load of black guys from Africa, from Cameroon, you might expect a bit of a clash there, but it was absolutely. They were singing, dancing together, hugging, laughing, and they completely got together, and then basically they joined forces and then carried on marching around London together, singing and chanting together.
I thought one of the issues about one of the rights concerns is that they want to stop immigration or something like that. They're anti-immigration. Right?
I mean, everyone that voted for Brexit had slightly different reasons. I think some people voted for Brexit, it was related to immigration. What I voted for Brexit, it wasn't anything to do with immigration for me. It was solely about sovereignty and getting the power back to the nation state of Britain. So I don't think it's right to say that all Brexiteers are anti-immigration or anti-immigrants. And there was genuine love between these Cameroonians and the Brexiteers last Saturday. They were literally hugging and singing together and then going off chanting together. And they did actually say at the end of last Saturday that they were going to meet up again this Saturday and do it together again. So I was a bit disappointed that I didn't see any of the guys from Cameroon there today. But I think, and prior to that point last Saturday, the police had been pretty heavy-handed with them. I don't know if you heard, they actually arrested a 13-year-old girl at one point and carted her off to the police station and wouldn't even allow her mother to go with her. I'm guessing they didn't even realise she was only 13 years old. So that's pretty shocking. I don't think the police are not allowed to arrest someone without their parents at that young age. So they were really heavy-handed. But as soon as these two groups came together, the police did not know what to do. The looks on their faces, and from that point onwards, last week, the police just were much more sort of standing back and just letting them carry on and march. So anyway, so that was all last week. And then obviously we had the march this time, and it was probably about the same numbers. So I think probably at its peak it might have got to a couple of hundred, but I think it was probably nearer 100 towards the end. Basically marching around, bringing traffic to a standstill. But I got there quite early, just as they were sort of starting to gather, and they were gathering near St James's Park station, outside the tube station. And it's funny because just as me and a mate were approaching, this sort of police van rushed past us and sort of pulled up to a few yards down the road. So we sort of like quickly walked over, and they were basically just lifting James Goddard and putting him in back of the van and arresting him.
So Steve, so what are you saying? So you never you didn't start off with where everybody else was outside the BBC and that? Who was the people?
No.
So who was the?
No.
So you went to a separate yellow vest protest?
Yes. So basically, it was the one that Jamie Goddard was coordinating, and that was starting at St James's Park, outside St James's Park Tube, and I think they were due to march to Westminster, and I don't know where onwards from there. So yeah, that was completely separate to the other one that was starting at the BBC.
So was it just coincidence that it was on the same day, or did they plan it deliberately?
I don't know because no, I've no idea. I think maybe it was just it was random. But interestingly, so basically James Goddard was arrested, and I asked the police, why you're arresting him, and they just said for public disorder. But apparently it was directly related to what he did with Anna Soubry earlier in the week when he called her a Nazi. So I was just reading now that they've let him out. They've released him on bail, but I think he said he's tweeted that he's got quite strict bail conditions, but I don't know what they are. So basically that march then went off without Jamie, who was kind of the main coordinator for it. But apparently the police said that they were not allowed to march towards Parliament. And I think that was because they wanted to keep them away from the other march, who were obviously organised more by the left. So they marched off.
What was the reasons for marching in the first place? Like, what are they protesting for?
Okay, so I think the core reason was Brexit, which I support, and that's why I was kind of there watching them all. But
Well,
they did have
they're angry that Brexit hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. And worried that the government's just making a mess of it and not doing it properly. But there were some people handing out leaflets with a list of other causes, and to be honest, I didn't support some of the other causes. I mean, one of them is the Three Boys Justice campaign, which yeah, I mean it's well, let's not go into that, but so it was they kind of sort of joined up a multitude of different causes, some of which I'd support, but probably wouldn't necessarily be so keen on some of the others. So I don't know why they do that. They sort of bring together a hodgepodge of different causes and people there for different reasons.
Yeah. So what would you say most of the people that came out there? What do you think their reasons were for being there?
What do I think? What? Sorry.
Most of the people that did turn up, what do you think their reasons for being there were?
It was a mixture, because there were some people with different signs or placards or whatever saying different things. I think the core. I'm sure all of them were very, very pro Brexit, but I think some of them had other issues that they wanted to protest about as well, like the Three Boys Justice campaign.
So do you want to go into more detail in regards to Brexit? Like what actually is Brexit, or what is it that they want to see happen as a result of Brexit?
Well, so basically, back in the referendum 2 years ago, we were asked a very straightforward question, which was basically along the lines of, do you want to stay in the EU or do you want to leave? That was the question that we were asked. And they had a vote in Parliament before that to say that, did Parliament want to ask the people in a referendum whether we want to stay or whether we want to leave? And Parliament voted to agree that we would have a referendum to make that decision. And we all know we had that vote, and the side that won was those people, the 17.4 million people that voted to say they wanted to leave the EU. And I think the concern is that going to now happen? We went to the people, we had a people's vote, the people were asked, and they answered that very straightforward question: I want to leave the EU. And now there's all this fuss about aren't we going to leave? On what basis are we going to leave?
Steve, that's what I want to get into. One sec, Scott. I'm gonna make you comment next door. I want to get into the details of like what does it actually mean leaving? What will change? That like what's in place right now that the people don't like that will change when we leave?
So again, as I say, there's a lot of different.
I heard Amy, like we was talking to Amy at the end, and one of the things that she mentioned was something to do with the what hair dryers or something like that.
Hair dryers.
Yeah. I think the hairdryer power or something like that.
The environmental laws that has come in through the EU laws about the type of electric current that could be used in appliances. So hairdryers can no longer be as strong as they once were. It's kind of like
okay, I didn't know about that.
Can't use those old light bulbs and things like that. Remember
another thing that I've heard a lot, is it like fundamentally like it might not be that everybody knows the specific details of everything about what Brexit means, but is it fundamentally that the decision-making power of like laws that get passed of to do with how this country runs are in the hands of people that are not in this country?
Absolutely, yeah. So increasingly substantial amounts of our laws are now being set by the EU. So we do not have control and say over the laws that were applied within Britain. And it was an ever increasing amount of law and volume of law and regulations that are set by the EU, and that Britain has no choice. They're just imposed on us. That was getting ever increasing in all the different areas of law. Whether it's consumer law, whether it's employment law, all of this just coming from the EU that we have no control on. So therefore, we are being governed, we're being led by this entity called the EU, and that entity is a corrupt entity. If you set up a company, you have to submit your financial accounts every year to Companies House. You have to submit your tax returns. The EU never submits its financial accounts because it is corrupt to the core. It cannot show clearly where all its money goes that we're all pumping in. And the reality is that a country like Britain puts more money in than we get out in benefits from the EU, than aid that we get from the EU. So therefore, we're a net payer into the EU because we're reasonably economically strong. It means we're paying much more money in that we can then claim back on benefit. So therefore, it's a cost to us. It's a direct, pure, expensive cost to the British. So on one hand, they're telling us what to do. They're setting a huge proportion of our law that we have basically no control, no say over, and we're paying them stacks of money that we don't get back. To me, they are the two main reasons why I personally wanted to get out of the EU. For me, it's got nothing to do with immigration whatsoever.
Cool, man. You saying, Sky, do you want to come in?
Oh yeah, so I was in comment there. Yeah, so sorry about that. I did want to ask. I forgot the question I was going to ask. So anyway, I just come now and respond to that. So I think Steve made a lot of points there that can be, to some extent, is correct about how the EU operates and how the EU functions. However, I think it's incorrect to say that we have absolutely no say about the laws and the rules that come in. So on several of the rules and the policies that come in through the EU's regulations, usually we do get a say about how much or to what extent we're going to partake or implement. I mean, I agree this isn't always the case, but in many of the cases, this is the case. Also, we do have MEPs in the European Parliament who do decide on these laws as well and can vote against or for this. So there is a democratic process, albeit, I guess, not fully giving our Parliament the last say, but putting it in the hands of Brussels. But also, I would like to point out that a lot of the regulations that Steve put out there are actually things that I would say are good for the UK. And so when you look at what you call it, the regulations when it comes to workers' rights, so when it comes to housing regulations and just things like that, the EU usually sets a higher standards than what UK governments, especially those of the Conservative or even Tony Blair's Labour Party, would have set. And when we look at like massive tragedies that happen in the UK because of bad regulations, like things like Grenfell and things like that, or because of poor regulations, I think there's definitely a good argument to say that the EU actually offers us safety, a safety net to make sure that our regulations are to the top standard and up there with the rest of the nations in the world. And I think if you look at the Conservative Party's history, they always tend to remove things like safety nets. So that ends up creating, long-term issues, especially for the poorest and the weakest in society. Sorry, Steve. I was just gonna say. Furthermore, I mean, I think there was definitely Steve is right to say that we've already had one referendum, but I think democracy isn't ever enhanced by having second votes. I mean, ever diminished by having a second vote. And if and now that the full issues that Brexit poses to all of us are now on the table, it would be interesting to see how people would vote now, knowing what the deal that Theresa May managed to get is and what we're likely to get in March.
Mm-hmm. Just on the about employment law, actually Britain has developed some better, stronger rights and entitlements for staff than the EU dictates, actually. So maternity benefits, paternity benefits. There are lots of benefits that the British government over the years has decided to implement that are actually even better than the EU standard. So yeah, absolutely. So it's not correct to say, well, if we didn't have the EU, our employment standards would drop, our employment rights would drop, because actually a lot of the good, strong aspects of our employment law are actually British aspects of employment law.
Some might argue Labour Party and Tony Blair politics, and the fear was that a Conservative government coming in, especially a Conservative government coming in that is so pro Brexit and so pro, small government and devolving powers to the market, that a lot of regulation would be watered down. And I think George Osborne and our guy, what's his name, David Cameron, definitely were very big on calling for deregulation of the market, especially
but in reality, that's not what they've done. That's not what Theresa May's done. It's not what David Cameron's done. They've given more employment rights. I'm amazed by it, because it's not what you might expect from a Conservative Party. I agree, but it is what they've done. I mean, the Conservative Party and the Lib Dems, when they were in coalition with them, have taken more people out of tax than ever before. So where they've consciously raised the minimum threshold over which you have to pay tax, they've raised that. So now millions of people are not paying tax because of what the Conservative government have done, and Labour never did that. And not only have they raised the tax threshold, which means many, many more people on low salaries now don't pay any tax, they've increased the level of the statutory minimum wage. That has increased year on year on year. So I think, I grew up in a time when everyone thought the Conservatives were not the nasty party and they weren't good for employment rights. Now they're doing stuff that is good. They're giving people more money. Low-paid people are now paying less tax or even no tax. The minimum national wage is higher now. It's going up year on year on year. So it's not all bad. But that's not about Brexit, really, is it?
Yeah, it's not about Brexit. But no, I just respond to that part. I agree with you that the Conservative Party have definitely done a lot of hard work on their public relations and making themselves look a lot better and doing small token and gesture things.
That's not taking millions out of tax. Isn't a small gesture. Okay, that's really
taking millions out of tax while simultaneously cutting back on massive services used, like things like EMA, child tax credits, like what's it called, like that whole connections thing that they used to do for young people, youth workers have been cut, social care workers have been cut, women who work in refuges have been cut, nursing and the NHS, although has received funding, hasn't received anywhere nearly enough. And
social workers are employed.
Whilst doing all this, they've cut business rates and corporate tax and the tax for the top people on the top 50% tax rate. They got rid of that tax rate altogether, I believe, actually.
A lot of all the things you just listed, like social workers, are not employed by central government. They're employed by local authorities. It's the local authorities' decisions of how many social workers they employ or how many libraries they close down. That's not central government.
But funding to social authorities comes from central governments. The central government decides how much funding those local authorities get.
The central government doesn't decide how many social workers a local authority employs. That's a local authority decision.
Yeah, of course, but they only have a certain amount of money given to them by the central government.
But most of their money comes from council tax.
And much of it comes from central government. Well, much of it.
They do get a proportion from central government, but the vast majority is council tax.
And they used to get a lot more prior to the cuts, is the point.
I just think when we're having discussions like that, we have to be careful and we have to focus on the facts and not the headlines in the press or in the media. And it is not true now to say that the Conservative Party is completely bad when it comes to workers' rights, because that's not true on all fronts, mate. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they have done some things that are very good for employment rights. I mean, gender pay gap. So that they introduced gender pay gap reporting last year, which means every company with 250 or more staff has to report on the differences between pay for men and women. And now they're talking about introducing the same on ethnicity.
Yeah,
So
they should. Why is it an afterthought?
Why what?
Why was the ethnic bar the afterthought? Why wasn't it done at the same time?
Well, you can't do everything at once, can you? I mean, can you believe that a Conservative Party is suggesting that? That's improvement.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's stop discussing the values or the issues around the Conservative Party, and let's get back to Brexit, because
Okay.
I've got several issues, and then we can go on back and forth on Brexit. But let's discuss Brexit as a whole, because for me personally, stay or leave, I'm not necessarily massively bothered by. But even with leaving, for example, right? Are you not worried by the amount of effects and the damage it's going to cause the economy?
There is probably going to be some uncertainty around it.
There already is.
But I don't think it will all be negative. And I think there will be lots of opportunity for economic growth and improvement after Brexit. So I don't go with all the doom and gloom mongers that it's all going to be awful. I mean, the Remain campaign said during the Brexit campaign before the referendum that immediately after the referendum, so before we'd even leave, that our economy will be collapsing, that there'll be a run on the pound, that things would be dire, and that we'd have to have they said we'd have to have an emergency budget within weeks of the referendum. That all proved to be nonsense. The other thing they said, the Remain sign said during the campaign, was that the EU had no plans for an EU army. And that has now proven to be another lie, because now we all know, and the EU has been very, very open, that they are absolutely intending forming an EU army. So, and I'm not saying on the Brexit side that it was all truth and that there were no lies either, but there was plenty of lies on the Remain side, and many of those, like I've just listed, have been absolutely proven.
But isn't this all the more reason for us to have a second referendum, especially in the account that now we know the full facts of what Brexit will look like, or possibly will look like, depending on deal, no deal. And we also have seen that, like you say, there's been lies told on both sides, and actually one side, the Leave side, actually broke the law in the midst of the election.
Well, there are also investigations into the Remain side as well, and whether they broke rules as well. So, but we don't do this in any other situation, do we? We don't say after a general election, oh well, that side didn't tell the truth, or that side didn't tell the truth, so we better run it again. We don't rerun elections because of those sorts of reasons, do we?
I mean, sometimes we do. It depends on the result we get. But I suppose, I mean, at this point right now, you don't think we could run a second referendum? You don't think that would be the best option?
If we did have a second referendum, then, I mean, I don't think we should have a second referendum. But if we did, then the options that should be available should be around on what different basis we can leave. There should not be an option to not leave, because that question has already been asked and answered. So basically what I'm saying is if there had to be another referendum, it should only be on in what way should we leave. There should not be an option to say we don't want to leave. And my view is most people that are calling for a second referendum is because they don't want to leave. That's the only reason they're calling for it, and they want to turn around the result. They want to stop us leaving.
Of course, the only reason why Brexiteers are saying that we have to have only a leave question, like you just said, is because you feel like we have to leave. And the point is, this is politics. Anything can happen. We could change our minds at any time. Why should we not be allowed to? There's a little bit of echo there, but why should we not be allowed to have a second referendum if that's
because that's a dangerous situation in my view, because it makes a farce of our democracy. It says you can be asked a question, you can give an answer, and if one side don't like it, then they'll force through the second question, a second run of it. It's dangerous. That's not how democracy works. And who's to say that we have a second one and then all the Ramonas aren't happy with that outcome either, so then they'll want a third one, then a fourth one. I mean, where do you stop? Why should you just stop with 2? Why not 3?
I think the second one is pretty would be pretty conclusive, no, Steve? Like if we have the second one and they definitely said, all right, cool, we know exactly what's going to happen now. We know we either have this Theresa May deal, we either leave without no deal, or we remain. People therefore could then choose from those 3 options which one they want to do.
I think it would be a dangerous precedent for democracy, and I think there would be an even bigger chance of civil unrest if that happened.
Based on a 1% difference in the vote, making such a big constitutional change to the way Britain's run and to the way people's lives so next 20 years.
Yes, but when the referendum was
and division to the country.
When the referendum was set up, though, they didn't say, "Oh, well, we must have a 10% majority or a 20% majority." Again, that's not how democracy works. You only need one more vote on one side, and that's the winning side. It's not about 1%, 10%, 20%. Democracy works on the basis of what's the majority.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, when it comes to most big constitutional changes, it usually takes more than just the majority. They especially to amend the American Constitution, for example, you need at least three quarters of both houses, I believe. Shouldn't we set a high mark when it comes to making such a big constitutional change to the way the country is actually governed?
No one was saying this before the referendum. It's only now being said from the losers. No one said that point before. If they said it before, then yeah, maybe it should have been something that should have been discussed and considered. But this was discussed. It went through Parliament. No one even said, "Oh, well, we better make sure that there's a certain level of a majority to put this through." It's too late. It's too late in my book to say that.
Fair enough. And so all that money that was claimed prior to the election that we're going to have, 350 million that every week that we give to the EU or whatever it was supposedly, right?
Uh-huh.
A lot of that money does come back, like on a net level, maybe not all of it, but a lot of that money already comes back to the UK.
Some of it comes back, not all of it, and not the majority of it.
Not all, but a lot comes back. And so do you not think that on that basis, that if after we leave the EU, we're going to be left with massive holes of where that money was coming back from the EU that will need to be...
No, because it's only the aid that currently comes to Britain from the EU is only a small proportion of the total money that we pay the EU. So that's the first point. So we will have more money. We will have more money available to use as we decide. Is the first point. And then the second point is we can be the ones that decide how it's used, completely how it's used, not the EU. And the government is already, obviously, in the government preparations for Brexit, the government is already preparing for the structures around how state aid will be given from the British government for things that might currently be covered by the EU or different things. So the government is already, the government is not telling us for some reason all the preparation that is being done across the civil service for Brexit. The government is getting very, very well prepared for it. And
they are. I've seen and I've heard various reports that the government aren't ready for it at all.
I mean, again, I don't. This is. I mean, I know without doubt that government departments are very preparing for it. But is that nothing will go perfectly though. I'm sure things, there'll be slip ups or things that won't be sorted properly, etc. But they are working hard and have been working hard for a long time to prepare.
What about the deals afterwards, Steve? Because this just feels like we spent 2 years not focused on anything else in politics other than Brexit, and it feels like we're going to spend the next 10 years after we leave doing very much the same, trying to get deals with all these different countries within the EU, trying to get a deal with the EU in the first place, trying to get a deal with America, deals with China and all these other countries. Like for the past however many years, all of our deals and our trade negotiations have been handled by the EU. We've barely got anyone left in the country that has the skills to really pull off these trade negotiations. Liam Fox has been playing all over the place.
That's just a media line. How do we know we haven't got the negotiators to come up with trade deals? How do we know that?
Most of them have been working in Brussels.
What, across the entire world?
No, in the when it comes to deals that affect the UK or the EU, most of our trade deals have been dealt with in Brussels.
But we were doing it before we joined the EU, didn't we? So we did it then, fine. Why can't we do it now?
A long time ago.
But we managed it then, so why wouldn't we manage it now? This is just all part of the doom and gloom spun by the Remain campaign.
What I'm saying is, it's going to be 10 years. Do you really think that we, in this point in time, with the economy in such a fragile position, especially the global economy, which is taking a downturn right now, with America doing this whole trade war with China, etc., etc.
Do you
think this is the right
using them
in 10 years focused on trying to get trade deals with China?
We're just taking America as one example. You really think Trump's going to take 10 years to decide what trade deal he's happy to do with Britain? He'll decide it in weeks.
Yeah, that's only if we let him come here and play golf with the Queen.
I'm happy with that, aren't you?
I mean, I don't think many people across the country are going to be happy with that one.
I don't think the Queen plays golf, by the way.
No, I think it'll have to be Andrew or someone like that.
But I don't think, there were countries that have, Japan, Australia, America. They've already indicated their keenness to do deals with us, but we can't do it yet because we're tied by the EU and we're not allowed to, which is crazy. But soon as we come out, that it will not take 10 years to do
chicken, Steve.
deals.
Chlorinated chicken from Captain America.
Oh, you swallow all the lines, don't you?
No. But seriously, chlorinated chicken is a massive issue. No.
Do you not think America has decent standards of hygiene for their food handling?
No, I don't. Have you seen Americans?
They're fat because they eat too much. They're not eating dodgy things other than too much calories.
I don't know. I'm not sure, Steve. I'm not sure.
But the other thing I wanted to say is that, again, not least because this the thing that sort of kind of James Goddard's leads, people are quick to try and turn Brexit into a left versus right, i.e., the right winger for Brexit and the left winger against it. That is just not the truth. I think one of the biggest Remainers in the country, but he won't be honest about it, is Jeremy Corbyn.
100%.
Jeremy Corbyn does not support, and it's bizarre because we have a Conservative Prime Minister who was a Remainer. She was an absolute clear Remainer, now allegedly trying to get us out of Europe. And then we have a Labour leader who in reality was a Brexiteer, but is kind of pretending not to be and pretending to be a Remainer. So like neither May and Corbyn, neither of them being honest to what their true belief is. And they're both trying to do something that's in the opposite direction to their core belief.
Yeah,
you could not make it up.
Yeah, it definitely is an interesting position to have. But yeah, Corbyn, that's why he's just been so quiet right now. I think you're definitely right, and I think that's something that we should highlight, I guess, here on content on the platform is the fact that Brexit isn't really a left or right thing. It appears that I think there is probably a little bit more or a lot more attention because of the Nigel Farages and so on the right wing Brexiteers. Well, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, a lot of those guys on that side of the things. I mean, we spoke to some socialists earlier today. One of the first people we spoke to, actually, when we interviewed him, he was a socialist guy, and he was very much for leaving the EU. He was, I think, Socialist Workers' Party. And, obviously they see the EU as a big sort of right-wing sort of a cabal or whatever it is they call it. So there are views on it, and I guess the EU does act as a cartel. So just to give some of the downsides of the EU, because I have been defending it a bit today, especially in terms of how it treats some of the third world countries. UK, like we say, we can't trade or buy you know, our fruits or vegetables really from the third world or places like Africa or the Caribbean or
Yeah.
South America, because we have to buy it from, you know, the EU first, and the EU does really set a lot of these tariffs to make
Yeah.
sure that money stays within the EU and doesn't get out. So there are negative and downsides to it, especially.
Yeah.
That's why there were some Caribbean people. Sorry, there were some Caribbean people who did vote for Brexit because they did feel the need to try and reconnect to the Commonwealth. So I would say,
Yeah. I mean, I've read some analysis where non-white people in some areas were much bigger Leave Brexit voters than in white areas. And actually, on the subject of immigration and colour as well, what the EU does, it protects free movement within the EU. The EU obviously is a predominantly white area. By coming out of the EU and removing that right for free movement, you are therefore going to need, for your skills and for to fill your jobs, more people to come to your country from outside of the EU, from across the world, from the Caribbean, from Africa, from Asia. So actually, you know, from my perspective, leaving the EU, we're more likely to have more non-white immigration than we do now. So therefore, I think that's what, to me, that's like the nonsense of trying to make out, as some people do, that, you know, Brexiteers are racist. Because actually, you know, we will still need skills. We will still need high skills people, and we'll have to get those we will be able to get those high skills people from across the world, which will mean more non-white people coming here for good employment. Hello.
Yo, Scarlett, where you at, fam?
You're still there.
My mic was on mute. My mic was on mute. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you about the immigration thing. But I think a lot of the thing that people will point out to is, do you think that this party was going to this Conservative Party, etc., is the party that's going to really allow more immigration, or will that just be tapered off completely? But I would definitely agree with you. I think if, just say when that election happened, when Theresa May had that little walk in Easter through the fields and whatever, and she had that election, and it all went bad for her, and she got the hung parliament. It would be very interesting to see what would have happened if Labour did win that election outright, and Corbyn was negotiating, and what kind of Brexit he would have had to negotiate for, what kind of success he would have got, or just simply how that would have went, because I guess a lot of his party would have definitely been anti-Brexit. He himself might have been buoyed by winning the election to maybe stick into his own ideas about Brexit. I mean, it could have been interesting.
To me, the thought of a Corbyn Prime Minister in Number 10 Downing Street is a whole lot more scary than the thought of us not Brexiting properly.
Oh, really? What's so bad about Mr. Jason? I mean, I've heard people say that you describe yourself as centre-left. So I'd say, I guess you was in that Blair, Brown, or maybe Liberal Democrat camp.
Yeah.
What is it about Corbyn that's so like scary to you?
Because I'm old enough to remember times in the 70s and 80s when people of his sort of political view were in power in certain councils across the country. So people like Derek Hatton in Liverpool, people like Ken Livingstone in the old GLC. In those days, when those sorts of people had power, those cities and towns came to a standstill. The rubbish piled up on the streets. There were strikes everywhere. They screwed things up. And I think, you know, we only need to look around the world where there are other countries who have or have had far left Marxist governments, and they go to the wall. You know, their economies drop, inflation rockets, unemployment rockets frequently. You know, people can't afford to buy their food. You know, people worry about people using food banks now. You know, when this economy collapses, when there's a run on the pound, when there's a run on the banks, you know, I can remember and look around the world today, people have. And I think he is as full as shit as a lot of politicians are, unfortunately. When he was doing his tour around the country, when he was trying to become the Labour leader, I went to see him at one of those, and when he answered questions, when he answered people's questions in the second half, I could see he was full of bullshit. He did not answer awkward questions. And I think this whole Brexit thing has really showed him up. He is no more genuinely honest than any other politician. He is as bad as the rest of them. He talked about a kinder, gentler sort of politics, and then sits in the House of Commons and calls a woman a stupid woman. His type of politics is a nasty type of politics. Look at all the misogynistic abuse that women have got from people that support him, from Momentum, who are basically, his backers, the people that support him. They are nasty people. It's not a nicer kind of politics. It's a vile, horrible type of politics that hates people, that's misogynistic, that's the amount, if you look at the history of the Socialist Workers' Party, which is kind of what has now become Momentum, they've had rape allegations that they cover up, that they don't deal, time and time again. These are horrible, white, middle-class, socialist, arrogant, misogynistic men who the young people across this country have been hoodwinked to think, they're good and nice and they're going to be nice to us and they're going to look after us all and look after the poor. Bollocks to it all. They are nasty people and they will screw this country up, and I don't want to see this country screwed up.
I don't know. I mean, I guess. Sorry, yeah. To begin with, you were talking about, I guess, that era in the 70s, which I'm not too familiar with directly, of leaders messing things up. I do know that Ken Livingstone in London was incredibly popular, specifically amongst the African Caribbean community. First in Brent, I believe, where he served as an MP, and then when he obviously was on the GLA as well, I think, as a councillor. And he was definitely massively popular in terms of getting ethnic minorities jobs, protection from police brutality and issues like that, and actually raising a lot of those concerns and issues. So I think like people like Ken Livingstone and that wing of that party is always going to get a certain amount of respect because they've had such a strong history of standing up for standing up against oppression, and standing up for minority rights. And I think the picture of Corbyn as this sort of like nasty kind of, I mean, he's definitely quiet. He definitely probably, like you say, I wouldn't say he's just as disingenuous as the rest of the politicians out there, but I definitely think he's learned a quick game over the past few years. Coming into politics, he's no longer able to say exactly what he thinks whenever he thinks it. He's definitely a lot more quiet, a lot more tame, and a lot more reserved. But I think that's just part of the politics. If he came out and was to say exactly what he thinks, he would be torn down. The way the media attacked him right in the beginning, as soon as he had been elected, just by the way he dressed, or because he didn't wear a poppy, or all of this kinds of stuff that the media, ridiculous stuff the media were coming at him for. Like, it was kind of nuts, to be fair. So and as for the misogynistic and anti-Semitic, the nasty woman, he claims.
I didn't even mention the anti-Semitism.
Okay, fuck up for that. But the nasty woman, he claims to have called her a nasty. Said they were nasty people. But to be fair, Theresa May is a nasty person, and she happens to be a female, but that doesn't take away from anything. But
can I just say one thing though?
Yeah,
Britain,
and the Socialist Party is not Jeremy Corbyn's party. But that is definitely
pretty damn close.
Dodgy stuff, yeah.
But can I just say one thing? One day, Britain will have a black prime minister or an Asian prime minister. We will have a non-white prime minister, and I think that's a really good thing. But do you know what? They will be a conservative. I'm damn certain Britain's first non-white prime minister will be a conservative. They won't be a Labour member.
I to be honest with you, I would not deny that. I mean, the first female was a conservative as well, but I think the first of a group is one thing, but being actually good, one, for that group, and two, for that country is another. And I don't think many women look back on Margaret Thatcher's time very fondly in terms of as for women, and I'm not sure a lot of ethnic minorities are going to look too fondly back on this ethnic minority conservative leader as being good for their group.
I guess you could say the same about Obama, couldn't you?
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. That's definitely true as well. But I think Obama was not, a complete disaster given where he came from in terms of Bush. But yeah, I don't think he'd done enough to address direct concerns within his own community or the community he came from, specifically in Chicago.
But you know how popular Trump is amongst Black Americans.
I mean, he has some popularity in some areas, but I'm not sure he's super popular at all. I think he definitely. I think his popularity polling ratings are probably like. Let me check. Trump polling ratings in Black America.
Have a listen to Candace Owens. I know she's only one person.
Oh gosh, she's a lovely young lady.
Indeed.
One of Kanye West's political advisors.
And I've had the pleasure of meeting her as well.
Have you? What, was she over here or did you go over there?
No, she came over here before Christmas.
Oh really? What's she doing? Giving speeches?
Well, so basically, one thing that she's part of in the States is called, oh God, what they called? I can't remember what they're called now.
Blacksit.
No, I can't remember what it's called. I'm really annoyed about that. But basically, what they've been doing is touring around the universities as a conservative group, and basically causing a lot of people to be really annoyed on the American campuses. And basically, they're planning to do exactly the same in the UK. So I think starting in February or March, her and some of the other people that she's been doing it with is going to be coming over to the UK and kind of setting up the same organization and doing a tour of our universities and colleges.
Can you just give me a summary of Candace Owens' beliefs or viewpoints or opinions? And if you really think that they would be good for the African Caribbean community here in the UK?
I mean, she's got lots of views and viewpoints and positions, but one of her positions is that the left and Democratic Party in America uses the ethnic minority vote to get into power, but actually doesn't give them the true benefits that they should be. So they're just being used as a voting group, really. And yeah, I mean that's one of our main points. I mean, to be honest, you'd have to look into her stuff and read the stuff that she writes and listen to her to get a full picture. But she's for small government, conservatism, patriotism, much of what Trump stands for, I would say.
Okay, fair enough. I hear you. And the thing is, I've heard a lot of this viewpoint being pushed and propagated. But my issue with it is, I feel like it takes away the agency, or takes away the ability, or it gives credence to the idea that African Americans or Black British people don't rationally think about politics themselves and make the decision for themselves, and that somehow they are just spoon-fed and are just the recipients of somebody else's manipulation and game. And I think it discounts the fact that, especially in America, there was a massive shift from when the African American community who are mainly conservative and mainly supported Republican ideas, and when the civil rights movement came about, and they wanted voting rights and things like this, and the Republican parties all seemed very much against it, and the Democratic parties were the ones who seemed to shift and move. That with that movement there, the African American party community had moved over from one party to another, from one party that was not really for civil rights to one that was for civil rights. And I think that similar things have happened here in the UK. So, especially with things like Corbyn. Corbyn was obviously has been our anti-racist campaigner for a long time, anti-apartheid campaigner, and so on and so forth. And so the African Caribbean community, who has never really been massive at turning out for votes and things like that, they turned out at the last election for Corbyn and things like that. And so I think the idea that the African Caribbean communities and just simply go along with the left wing, because the left wing feeds them ideas about racism, discounts the agency that African Caribbean community has for themselves to actually interpret the messages put out by those two groups and decide which ones makes more sense for them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely think the left wing made a more concerted effort to reach out to those groups, and I definitely think it was definitely political. Like in this country, in particular, opening and letting a lot more Caribbean people in, and being the party of the sort of Commonwealth or of the, what do you call it? The NHS, the party of the Windrush generation to a certain extent. By doing that, the Labour Party were able. I mean, it was definitely a strategic plan. I won't deny that.
Well, just on that, and I'll admit I'm not a huge expert, but the whole Windrush scandal, has that not been something that's been going on and an issue sitting there for a long, long time? So, it wasn't just the fault of the current Conservative government when it came to light. It had been a problem sitting there for years.
Yeah. So yeah, it had been a problem for years. Definitely and it was a problem under the Labour Party government as well.
Exactly.
Prior to, the Conservatives, definitely. But I think what had happened was the Conservatives had come in with this harsh target, which they knew they wasn't going to meet, but they wanted to pretend like they were going to meet it, and they wanted to look hard on immigration. And so they started doing more to restrict people's livelihoods or things like that because they wanted to look like they were being hard on immigrants. But in doing that, they ignored advice on how that was going to widely affect. But obviously, that policy, it's like, look, like you probably know how it works as well. Like you've got friends who work in the civil servants, saying like the civil servants have a lot of these ideas that they have on shelf, which they use for both parties, regardless. Do you know what I mean? And quite often, a new party will come in and they'll say, "What are the options?" And the civil servants will say, "You could do this, you could do that. This minister used to do this." And quite often, both parties have used these things in the past. Do you know what I mean? It's just the extent to which they are used and whether they get caught red-handed using them, as Theresa May did in that instance. Do you know what I mean? But yeah,
someone's just saying in the chat, in fact, they keep repeating the same thing, saying that check out Eddie Isaac on YouTube, Black brother protesting with the far right today. So my first point would be it wasn't the far right. They were people supporting Brexit. And yes, Eddie Isaac is a black guy and he's frequently at these sorts of things. So what? That completely supports my point that this isn't a left versus right issue. It absolutely is not a white versus black issue. And my point that there are more non-white people that voted. Well, there are many non-white people that voted for Brexit as with white people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I don't brush my teeth, says Mohammed Islam.
You read too many of the comments, Steve. Yeah, I'm just checking out this Eddie Isaac guy. I'd like to have a conversation with him at one point. I'd be interested to see what his political viewpoints are. But yeah, it looks like he is down there. He's been speaking for a while. Like you said,
yeah.
There's no issue with that. So yeah, so with me
and another non-white guy that really supports this cause is Red Pill Phil from Manchester, I think he is. He's another good guy who does a lot of live streams and occasionally comes to marches and demos. Non-white face who completely supports Brexit, is worried about Islam, which obviously is another subject we haven't touched on.
No,
face who completely supports Brexit, is worried about Islam.
A little bit of echo. Yeah, definitely nothing to worry about when it comes to Islam, but that is another conversation.
Another day.
Yeah, for sure. My voice is going for sure.
New person in the hangout store. What's your name again, fam? Hopsky. Hello, you saying you're there?
Yeah, one second.
You can continue doing your thing until he's ready to start talking.
All right, cool. Yeah. Good to have a few new joiners. It'll be interesting to see what side they come on. And if you guys are new joiners, just to let you know, you do have to mute your mics and mute your YouTube, the playing in the background, and just focus on the hangouts. And yeah, but yeah, we good to get a few views and see what side of politics they come down on. For me, yeah, I'm pretty much level balanced. I don't personally think that the political system is necessarily, like as it stands, necessarily massively like of the greatest effect in terms of for the African Caribbean community, something that we need to too much worry about. I think if Brexit happens or doesn't happen, I think as a community, as groups and across the country, you just need to find your way to get through a lot of these political decisions. They happen anyway. They're kind of enforced on you, and you just find a way to work through them. So I think, but really and truly, I think Brexit will my only issue with Brexit is it just seems like a big distraction. And I just feel like we could have probably just gone on without having to go through it. I think David Cameron should have probably just negotiated harder with the EU when he went.
I mean, have any of you guys actually followed the European Parliament? Can anyone here tell me who the current leader of the current president of the European Union is right now?
Juncker.
And who was before him?
Juncker was. I know Blair wanted to be the president of.
He did.
The EU.
You see, this is the thing. This is the thing. There are many people out there that are very.
The thing is, there's a lot of presidents in the EU. You have the president of the European Commission and of the Council and of the.
Of course. But then I would like to ask everyone in the panel and the people on chat, what is their knowledge of the machinations of the European Union?
What do you mean? How it works?
What is your knowledge? What do you know about the European Union? What are the machinations of it? Who runs it? How these people are elected, or sorry, not even elected, bestowed.
We elect the MEPs here in the UK based on proportional representation, based on the boroughs of the EU districts or boroughs that we have. I think they're quite a lot bigger than the normal constituencies that we have. And so we send these MEPs off to the EU. You're right to say completely that we don't necessarily pay much attention on what happens there. But I think so you have the European Parliament itself, which looks over the day-to-day laws or policies so when we get those policies in sort of like the EU-wide policies in terms of environmental caps on what kind of light bulbs we could use or what kind of hair dryers we could have in terms of electricity, that comes through discussions from the European Parliament. I think that then goes to the European Commission, and then the president signs it off. And at that point, I think European states are expected to I think the European Commission itself is actually made up of the member states, so not the MPs, but the member states of Parliament. So I think that's when the presidents of each country from the EU will get to have a say on a law before it is then passed into fully becoming EU laws. But I'm pretty sure we do get a veto at that stage on whether that law will apply to the UK or not.
An excellent answer. But what we need to understand is that we are allowing, we live in the UK in a democratic society where we vote on various political parties to run our country. And it just seems to me that we are being dictated by a group of people that we don't even know what these people's names are, and this is the problem. I think, and I'm not an advocate. Let's get this straight right now. I'm not far right. I'm not far left. I'm a central realist, and it just seems quite absurd to me that we are allowing a group of unelected individuals that we have not even heard of dictate the way we live our lives.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I should tell you what, I couldn't necessarily disagree with that. That makes perfect sense. But I think my issue with with a lot of the Brexit thing is that to some extent it distracts from the first level of what I think we have to deal with in this country, which is Westminster and those politicians there. And I think if you dealt with them first and got rid of them, we could get a true picture of what dealing with the EU is like. But I feel like so many times in the past, especially with David Cameron, it was one of his favorite things. But even just not just him, other MPs, I mean politicians before him, they would use the EU as an excuse to why they're not doing things, and that we can't do it because of the EU, we can't do it because of the EU. I think a lot of the time they were lying. And it's because they didn't actually want to do it, and it was just convenient for them to say that. And I think even once we leave the EU, a lot of these liars are going to find different things to lie about or different ways to, do you know what I mean? So I think there's definitely an issue that we have these unknown people in the EU running us. But I think the people that we do know are also a big issue.
Right. How much money do the taxpayer give to the European Union on a weekly basis? How much money? In fact, how much taxpayers' money does this country donate to foreign aid? I'm a taxpayer. Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a rich man, but I work hard and I pay a lot of tax. And when I see my tax money, the money earned off the back of my hard work, going to foreign aid and to the European Union and not even contributed back into the own country that I live in, we've got a very serious problem.
I hear you. But like I think with the EU, the money we contribute to the EU, a lot of that does come back. Not all of it, granted, but a lot of it does come back. But I hear you. But like I say, I think the main problem it comes down to our politicians in many ways, and I think our politicians here in the UK are the first line of issue that we deal with, because, like you say, even with the international aid thing, personally, I'm kind of pro international aid, but I understand that if there's issues here in the UK, giving money away can seem like a bad idea. But I think one of the reasons why is it that a lot of these countries are in poverty, and why are we doing this international aid thing? And is this international aid thing actually helping, or do we have people from Oxfam going to some of these countries and molesting children and doing all kinds of dodgy stuff on British taxpayer money? And I think that is definitely a valid point to make. But I think we should really be scrutinizing our politicians and the leaders who are enabling these things to happen in those countries, and actually be said, are you actually doing any international aid? Because we've been, doing these red nose flipping funding things. How many years in a row we've given how many millions? How much of it is actually getting there, and how much of it is actually working? Or are we just enabling a bracket of aid workers to go over to these countries and pretend like they're doing something when they're not actually doing anything, just on, just having a jolly on the taxpayers' money? And also, we should add to that, how many of our big corporate businesses, which don't pay tax here in the UK, are also over in a lot of these third world countries, exploiting the resources of these countries and the third world countries, which the British politicians allow them to get away with, turn a blind eye to it, and actually encourage them to do it. And then meanwhile, turn to you and me and every other person in the country and expect them to give money over to these poor countries who these guys have been fleecing. So I think, our politicians are the first line that we have to deal with.
Right, I agree with you. I agree with you, because the foreign aid that this country sends to these supposedly impoverished countries, the levels of corruption are the hierarchy of the levels of corruption is just it's incredible. Now I've spoken with many and this is one instance I've spoken with people that I work with, people from Pakistan, and they have told me the levels of corruption are so bad that the money, the foreign aid that we send to these countries, not a single shekel actually goes to the causes that the money is initially sent for. And this isn't just hyperbole from the man on the street. This comes from the source, and it needs to stop. It really needs to stop. We need to wake up and recognize that the money that we donate to these countries with foreign aid needs to be audited, it needs to be administrated, and the money that we send needs to go to the causes that are worthy of it.
It will never reach there, though. The middle class have been pulling your leg all this long because it provides them with jobs, and everybody takes their word as Bible. So, that's been a good cash making.
Of course it has, and you know why? And you know why? These corrupt officials are actually laughing at
Of course,
us.
yeah. They're in the dinner tables about, I think they pay themselves like up to 500,000 bonuses. These are charity.
It doesn't matter what the figures are. The fact is that the money that we send never goes to the intended cause, and it needs to stop.
It's just money laundering, to be honest.
100%, 100%. Yeah, that's a big part of I suppose. Yeah, so that's why I think like sometimes when I do look at the Brexit debate, I feel like sometimes it is used by smart people within that government to try and distract people from issues that they could also really think. But once we leave the EU, but I do also understand that being part of our European Union where you don't necessarily know the leader's name, it doesn't make much sense. And I think the way democracy has been done in that way hasn't made much sense in terms of towards closer union, yes, but that needs to be something considered by the entire population, and the entire population has to be informed and have some knowledge over. And like you say, I'm not sure having a president of the EU is something that's ever going to be necessarily liked by the member states of the EU. Like,
and also they're not really smart. They just speak well and they wear suits.
This country made a very wise decision not entering the monetary union of the EU, i.e. adopting the euro. We made a very, very smart decision not to join, because the euro has dragged many, many European countries down into perpetual debt that they will never able to climb out. Look at Greece, Spain, Ireland. These countries will never, ever be able to pay back the debt they owe to the European Union.
So true. Also, with all this yellow vest protesting, what's going to happen to Europe if they're all protesting? So isn't it a good thing that they're leaving Europe? Because
in my eyes, and mark my words when I say this, the state of the European Union now, the state of the EU, I guarantee you within a decade, the EU will no longer exist. And in my humble opinion, when we see what is going on in France and what is now happening politically in countries like Hungary, Poland, and Italy, and especially Germany, where the rise of nationalism is becoming very, very apparent.
Yeah.
In my opinion, in a decade's time, the EU will no longer exist, and Europe as a continent is gonna witness some very serious public disorder.
I think it will be a lot sooner than 10 years. Because a lot of those countries are becoming very nationalistic. So they will eventually fight against each other.
But I mean, with their economy so integrated, do you think they could afford to fight against each other?
I mean, they're protesting, they're angry, so there won't be a good economy eventually. Because they're not.
Do you think that's a problem? The EU was built on this liberal idea that integrating economies will stop wars on the European continent. But that sort of idea is something that seems nowadays only to be held by the liberal elite, for who this whole system seems to have worked quite well for, and people who feel like it hasn't worked quite well for are no longer buying into this whole idea of peace by integrating your economies.
It did create peace because there wasn't any war after World War II. That's the reason why they created the EU, and there has been peace because they all agreed to work together. But obviously, it's now breaking apart.
Europe has had a very distinct history of violence. You look at the First World War, you look at the Second World War, go back even further in history, and you will see that Europe has a very, very violent history.
Yeah. I can't deny about that. But I mean, so if the great liberal idea about integrating economies, creating peace doesn't work, is there the threat of war, do you think, on the continent with somebody?
Definitely, hands down.
But there already has been war. After the Second World War, there were wars in Europe. You had the Croatian War, then you had the Bosnian War in the 90s.
Exactly.
So there's always been one. Then not too long ago, you had Russia or militants dedicated to Russia starting a war in the Ukraine. So there has been war in Europe after the Second World War.
I suppose the technical argument to that would be those countries weren't part of the EU at the time when they got into war.
But you're talking about Europe as a region, not as a political entity.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, for sure. Okay.
Russia has invaded Ukrainian states. Russia has invaded Georgia, and everyone ignores that.
Yeah.
They've completely torn up international law and invaded other nation states, and the rest of Europe and the rest of the world has completely ignored it and let them do it.
Steve, the Russians are pissed. They're very, very pissed off with the encroachment of NATO onto their territories.
They're not their territories anymore. They're not their territories.
But they still think that it is.
In their heads, but they're wrong, aren't they?
Of course they're wrong. Of course, because the countries surrounding Russia made a conscious decision. And okay, we had the collapse of the Cold War. We had the collapse of communism, and all of those vessels, states of Russia or the USSR decided to leave. And that really, really, really didn't go down too well with the communists.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in for a sec. We've got a lot of new people on the panel still, so I want to hear everybody's opinion on the topic at hand.
Do you think Britain will leave NATO, though?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Do you hear me?
Leave NATO.
Do you think they will leave NATO?
Hey, Drina.
Chill.
Drina.
Yeah.
Let Leon speak.
I'm speaking. Sorry, one sec.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, we got a lot of new people on the panel right now. So I want everybody to just reflect on what the topic is and to give their opinion about, like, to help make it for people like me. Cause like I said, I'm not that politically aware, but I like to learn how the world works and everything like that. Just to explain what happened today.
Right. Let me tell you what happened today. What we witnessed.
I want everybody to give their breakdown on what today was about. Right, one after the other.
What we witnessed today, yeah, and I was following it all day. I've been sitting here and I followed it. What the biggest threat to this country right now is a general election and the socialist, communist party that is called Labour taking control. If these people actually get into Parliament and take power, my friend, in my humble opinion, they will ruin this country. Do you actually want Diane Abbott as the Home Secretary? Do you understand what that entails? Diane Abbott as the Home Secretary. That puts her in charge of MI5.
Why not? What's the problem?
Oh my
She's
God!
a joke.
Oh my God!
One at a time. I just want people to give like their what they think today was about, and then we can all get into it afterwards. But one at a time, still.
One at a time.
You must understand that Diane Abbott is a very extensional danger to this country. Yeah, not only is she intellectually inept, she is, in my humble opinion, a racist, and she is a terrorist.
Adrina, I beg you mute your mic. Okay. Let my man finish his explanation, and
I'm done. I'm done now. Let the other people on the panel contribute.
Adrina, come in now. Yeah, give your breakdown about today's events.
Basically, when I saw the protest, all I saw was lots of policemen and not any action, and photographers waiting for action to happen. It just looked really, what's the word? Like the older people seemed more lively and had more guts than the younger people. Everybody was just too scared to do anything. It seemed so weird.
So what was you expecting to happen? What did you think this event was about?
It was going to be like France. Like there would be a couple of people, creating a little bit of a racket. It just seemed too orderly, and everybody just standing around. It was weird, weirdest protest ever.
So what do you think will be the effect of today? What do you think the effect of today will be, if any?
Well, I just feel like the general population is under a spell. Like there's a spell on everybody to just be frozen. It's like they're in a trance. What's happening in Europe is not happening here. Like nobody's angry, nobody's annoyed with their situation. They're just like in a zombie trance. Like a spell has been put on the people. And today's protest what was that? That's not even a protest. That was just everybody would just look so scared, and even the police look bored. I don't know.
So what would you like to see happen?
I would like to see more, organized proper protests, like, what protests are. People marching, walking along, not just standing there.
My dear, you have no...
Hopsky, chisel man, so you just went. I want everybody on the panel to
okay, cool.
To give their point.
All right, Leon, it's cool.
Yeah, Luke, you wanna introduce yourself and give your breakdown of today's events? Hey, yo, Luke, you there? Luke Nash Jones.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, I don't know why my microphone's not working, so I just have to use the laptop one. Sorry. Well, today was interesting because we saw, for the Yellow Vest movement, people such as John McDonnell, Owen Jones speaking. There was a trade union there, and there was the People's Assembly basically there. So it was very left-wing, socialist, which I think is actually in line with the French Yellow Vest, because they support Mélenchon, who is in many ways similar to Jeremy Corbyn, which is, for about 2 months I've been saying this is a left-wing thing. There's nothing right-wing about the Yellow Vest. It's got nothing to do with Brexit. So in that sense, I thought what happened today was very interesting, because it showed that to be the case. That the French Yellow Vest came over and stood on a stage with Labour Party members, but at the same time you've still got people trying to claim that it's supposedly something to do with Brexit. People like James Goddard, who nobody actually saw campaign for Brexit before the referendum, but is clearly jumping on a bandwagon, came out there and, well, he got arrested today, which isn't surprising if on Wednesday he threatened to start a war and seemed to be rather aggressive, I'd say, towards that policeman, perhaps made a racial remark. So he got taken away. But what you're seeing happen today, I think, is the left has come out and said this is their movement and they're going to claim it.
Nice.
And what would you like to see? I don't even know if you would, if you're happy to see these protests even going down in the first place. Like in relation to what the protest is about, what would you like to see happen?
I don't really like the style of the protest. I understand people in France are very upset about the cost of living, but I don't see how burning one's neighbour's car or something. If I came outside one morning and found my neighbour set my car on fire because he was angry that his benefits had been cut, I wouldn't be feeling really very pleased. I think he was a bit of a nasty person. I was going to use another word, but I behaved myself. But a bit of an idiot, perhaps. I just think this is really thuggery. And France does this about every decade or so. They just go and have a massive tantrum and start burning stuff. It's often about petrol prices, which is
what you're witnessing is not a tantrum. It's not a tantrum.
I hope Chisel man is keep the mic on you, man. Let them get through.
Cars. They're not standing up and giving speeches. When you have a rally, you need to have an objective to it. And I might not be on the left, but I must say that the left actually did achieve that today. They had an objective to their rally where people attended and heard a speech. what you're seeing with people are trying to do with right-wing rallies, and some of these rallies, often in Paris left-wing rallies, is they're just running around smashing stuff and getting into fights with policemen just for makes them feel like heroes when they're not actually achieving anything. When you have a rally, you want to direct objectives. So it'd be better even if they just had 10 people standing somewhere where they know the media are recording, or standing outside of an MP's office. That would be more objective, or even just standing letter writing. Just walking around the streets for hours on end doesn't actually achieve anything, and it's just actually inflaming a lot of tension.
They don't make it on the news though, do they? Nobody records them.
This is a problem with rallies in general, even with a lot of the right-wing rallies, like the free speech rallies or these Tommy Robinson rallies. They're not reported on by the police, not the police, sorry, the media. The Brexit rallies are not being reported on. A lot of these rallies are achieving very little at the end of the day because the media is not covering them. There's very few YouTubers out there reporting on them, and they're often involved in spats with each other. So at the end of the day, in that sense, it's not going to achieve anything really. We need some kind of democratic system, I think, rather than riots. We need to somehow try and... It's very awkward because we have first past the post, and it's like the only place in the whole of Europe with first past the post is Britain, and that's probably no coincidence. That's where the City of London and the World Banking is based, protecting the tax havens. But
sorry, Luke, sorry to cut in there. Sorry, just to do the little content thing. Just can you explain first past the post to people who might not understand what that means?
Okay, well, in most of Europe, they have something called proportional representation, which is that generally have a far larger area. In the UK, we have something called first past the post, which many of the former British colonies like USA and Australia have. Basically, to win in first past the post, you don't need to necessarily have the majority of the votes. It's just the person who gets the highest number of votes in the election. So if you have a lot of parties, and this is something the left's doing very badly actually, because they've got so many parties, their votes are being split down a lot. So you've got Labour, Green, Lib Dems, all these different like communist parties. That's vote splitting, and then so they end up with smaller votes. And the Conservative Party might get in a seat where they only have a third of the vote. So they don't represent the most of the people in the country. So it's something like proportional representation. You consider it over a far bigger area, and you start giving out seats by the whole percentage of the votes in that area. So then the Tories would actually only get a third of the votes in this example I've given, rather than actually taking the government. So if you go to Wales, there we have it set up. If you go to London, we have proportional representation set up. And you see a lot more of the smaller parties are getting in, like Lib Dems, Greens, UKIP. They get a lot more seats. Like the only seats that UKIP, for example, has in Britain are in London and Wales. But generally, we don't use proportional representation in the UK. So any small party is blocked out, and it just protects the two main parties.
Cool, man. Hey, Witness, you want to give you a breakdown of today's events?
Sure, of course. In my humble opinion, the British Yellow Vests are inspired by the Gilets jaunes, which is the Yellow Vests in France, who are protesting against the economic policies of the French president, Emmanuel Macron. Some of them within the Yellow Vests in French are also making demands for him to resign, for Emmanuel Macron to resign from his position as president. Now, that's what they're concentrating on in France, mainly the economics of Emmanuel Macron. When you come to the United Kingdom, the small British Yellow Vest group seem to have concentrated on something else. And the main things that they seem to be concentrating on is urging a no-deal Brexit. They feel that there might be a betrayal of the result of the referendum. So they're protesting against the government, which is the Tory government under Theresa May. They are protesting against her negotiation skills for Brexit, and they're protesting and they're urging for a no-deal Brexit. So it's mainly concerned, for the most part, with the referendum results. They feel that the result might be betrayed, so they're doing their best to protest against what the Tory government under Theresa May is doing in the negotiations. That is what I believe they are mainly about, the British Yellow Vest.
Can I just ask? Do you mean the People's Assembly that had the main protest today, or do you mean the James Goddard mob?
Well, for the most part, the people who've been doing it today, I haven't seen them around for most of the week. It's mainly been a small group who have been dedicated to hanging around Westminster and going up outside of Westminster as well. They've been to other places that I've seen them on social media, whether it's I can't remember the name of the town, but it's mainly those guys. All the other stuff that happened today, I was surprised seeing the people who turned up for the British Yellow Vest, because I haven't really seen them for the last couple of weeks. So my knowledge is mainly centered around the smaller group of people who've been doing their protesting in Britain.
Did you think the protest was boring, Witness?
Sorry, no, I didn't. No, I didn't think it was boring. I was still surprised that they've gotten this big, because, like I said, it was always a small group, a dedicated following, but I didn't think there'd be these many people. But I don't think what they're doing might actually help them get what they want. It's done a good job in getting notoriety, but I don't know, because I remember in this country when close to 1 million people protested against the Iraq War, and the government just went ahead and did what they wanted under Tony Blair. So I can just see the Tories doing what they want and not really listening to the British Yellow Vest group, basically.
And this is the thing. Many people have very, very short memories. You must understand it was the previous Labour government that led us into Iraq. Yeah, Tony Blair, that man. I'm trying to find an apt word for him, but I would consider him to be a criminal. He led thousands of British troops into Iraq, which led to hundreds of deaths. And I'm 47 years old, and I've been following geopolitical events for a long time. And I will never forget the look on Tony Blair's face when he left Camp David with George W. Bush. The look on his face was, what the hell have I got myself into? The Labour government ruined this country. The former Labour government ruined this country. And when they left Parliament, when they was voted out and the Conservative government came in, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer left a note on the desk in number 11 Downing Street and said, "Good luck, we've spent all the money." It was Gordon Brown that sold. It was Gordon Brown that sold the UK's gold reserves at a fraction of what the gold was actually worth. Look it up. It's history.
Yeah, no, Gordon Brown definitely. Sorry, Luke, 1 second. Gordon Brown definitely did sell the gold at a low rate for sure. But the note that was left on the office in number 11 was left by, I think it was Liam Bryan. I'm not sure exactly. It was the secretary to the treasurer, not the treasurer himself. It wasn't Gordon Brown. And also, Gordon Brown was the guy he was praising earlier for keeping us out of the EU, by the way. But sorry, let me just give my take on today's protest, since we were going around quickly giving our takes.
Yeah, you were right in the middle of it, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there today. It was for me personally, I went there expecting, obviously, like Witness was saying earlier, there has been a lot of talk about the James Goodall and those guys who were camped out of Parliament and what they were doing in terms of the Yellow Vest movement. So for me, it's quite surprising when I got there to see such a large left-wing group there. And it was definitely, the left wing were definitely there to reclaim their Yellow Vest. They did bring out, I think, a much larger group than the rivals. I think they brought between 200 to 400 people, maybe more, maybe up to 600 possibly. There was a lot of them basically. But like I say, and like everyone else has been saying, I think their protest was a lot more timid than what anyone would expect from a Yellow Vest protest. When you look at what they've done in France, what they've been doing in France, and I can understand the brother Luke's point about, not wanting to burn down your neighbor's car. Obviously, I can see that as being pointless and obviously being dangerous. But in terms of actually creating more civil disruption to society and actually creating a scene, blocking off traffic, making life hard for the establishment to keep going on and actually making themselves noticed. I feel like this protest was very timid and very quiet, and it's just the only difference between this and any other protest was that they was all wearing yellow jackets, and I think they could have just done a bit more. Even like they should have probably, in my opinion, done a bit more. And I think really the F media were going to report on it. The only thing they really could report on was the far right guys at the end trying to infiltrate the stage and just coming to, just a confrontation that happened at the end. That was the most, I suppose, newsworthy part of it. But I mean, it was good to see Owen Jones there. It was good to see John McDonnell there. But I just feel like the protest needed a bit more, like action. Yeah, definitely action. Otherwise, it was just gonna.
Gatta, do you think if there was more black people that it would be more livelier? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because somebody asked us this question in terms of how would you get more, or how do you unite the cause? Because to a certain extent, a lot of what those left-wing guys were calling for in terms of an end to austerity, changing laws, a lot of the stuff that they were calling for, end to cuts and stuff like that, are stuff that people within our community would definitely gravitate towards. But for some reason, these protest marches only tend to attract middle-class people from certain demographics rather than bringing together all the groups. But that being said, we did see quite a lot of black people and African Caribbean people working as organizers behind the scenes when we got into the media area, whether it was collecting money or just things like that, like managing the money process. There was quite a few different groups there, or people there. But it'll be interesting to see how you can get more, or what a group like Gang and some of the G-Walk people would make of going on a protest like that. It'll be interesting to get their opinion on it.
Okay.
Because they don't properly address working class issues. Do you think that's why? Or you said it's mainly middle class people. And to be fair, this is what I seem to notice with Labour. It says it's very much the working people's party, but whenever I observe Labour, it is very middle class. Why do you think it?
Not really. That's not true at all.
Sorry. Did any, and I've been watching this stuff all day. Did you see the Labour supporters flying the communist flag with the Communist Party below the sickle? Did you people actually see that? We are dealing with communists.
Nobody's that old to remember about communists.
Well, you need to educate yourselves.
There's the problem.
No, sorry, Hopsky.
We are on that. But I mean, the hammer and sickle in itself is actually the symbol of the workers and worker people, not necessarily of any sort of particular communist.
No, it's the flag that killed millions. It's the flag that killed more than Hitler killed.
Stalin killed millions under communism.
Times change. People can't remember what the flag means. That's an awful thing to say. Like, oh, people can't remember what the swastika means. That's not an excuse to
be honest, nobody talks about history that much, and it's not the people's fault. They're not told much about history. I'm just talking about the average Joe. They don't remember all these, wars that happened years ago. It's too far away from them.
Well, I think that's been generous to them. I think it's that the schools don't teach them about these things.
Yeah, the schools' history lessons are extremely boring.
So I mean, the hammer and sickle. What else was the issue? Hopsky, sorry.
You must understand that communism was formed after the Russian Revolution in 1917 by Lenin. Lenin and the Communist Party, and Stalin followed Lenin after his death. Stalin was a paranoid psychopath that actually persecuted and killed millions of Russians by sending them to the salt mines in you need to catch up with the history. You need to understand that Stalin in the Second World War purged the officers of the Russian army. Up to 50,000 officers of the Russian army just prior to the just prior to the Second World War were taken to the gulags and executed. Yeah, you people need to understand the roots of communism and its ideology.
Okay, I understand the history. I know what you're talking about.
Sorry, witness, do you want to go? Because
Sure. Hupsky, I understand that history. I can't speak for everyone else on the panel or the hangout, but you don't need to explain that to me. I know about that. What I wanted to concentrate on is this talk about Owen Jones. Now, I just want to clear something up.
Sorry, can I just jump in there quickly? Just because I just wanted to respond to him quickly on that thing, and then I'll let you get to Owen Jones. Because I think the history is very clear in terms of what communism, or how communism played out in terms of in Russia regarding Lenin and Stalin and their brands of Leninist or Stalinist communism. But I think it would be incorrect to pretend that's where communism started. Communism actually started a long time before that, and I suppose, you know, it was best.
Karl Marx.
Exactly, like Karl Marx, like almost 100 years prior to their revolution. And Karl Marx just pretty much wrote an idea in which he said the hammer and sickle will always be the symbols of the worker. He also went on to discuss basically the material issues, where you had a very wealthy class at the top of society and you had an impoverished lower class at the bottom of society. Something that I think an observation that I think many people think up to today would say was a correct one. And I just think when you look at what Stalin and Lenin did and you try and say that's all of what communism or socialism stands for, it takes away from the reality that those were just two psychopathic men in their country.
There's a apology here, because you wouldn't turn around and say that the swastika wasn't used for centuries before Hitler's. That would be a very perverted justification to wave it. So, saying that the sickle and hammer was in use before Lenin, it doesn't mean it's okay. Those bad things were done in its name, and it symbolizes that. And the people that wave it do actually generally admire those politicians.
That's true, but Luke, bad things were done in the name of the cross. You know, many people went around the world with a cross in one hand and a sword in the other hand, telling people to convert or die. We don't demonize the cross as a whole or tell people to stop being Christian.
People generally don't associate the cross with that, do they? They generally associate it with going to church.
Well, I think it depends who you talk to, Luke. There's definitely certain groups who do definitely associate.
I'm not suggesting. I don't actually wear a cross, but if I was going to wear some kind of Christian symbol, I wouldn't wear a Templar cross. There's a difference.
But the general point I'm making here is that we can't decide for certain symbols that this symbol here, it represents all this evil, even despite the fact.
So you would let people you wouldn't frown upon people using the swastika, you're saying?
No, you're just putting words in his mouth now. And you're being annoying.
I'm following the reasoning.
Yeah, but you've got all these ideas in your head related to the question.
I would definitely
the argument you're given.
I would definitely question people if they were wearing a swastika as to what the reason was behind it.
Right, you guys need to read Animal Farm, and it's a novel by George Orwell. Who's read it?
I've read the book. I know what it's about.
I watched the film as well.
Can I just mention what I was trying to say about Owen Jones before because in regards to what COE Leon was talking about, I just need to clarify something. The yellow vest that I know of, that I see, Owen Jones is not a part of it. Are we saying today that Owen Jones is a part of the yellow vest? Because what I saw was him being what I saw him today, he was being harassed by members of the yellow vest.
Part of the yellow vest for months.
Owen Jones is a lying little weasel.
Okay, I just need to clarify something right now in front of the people listening. As far as I'm concerned, Owen Jones is not part of the British Yellow Vest.
Well, that's not true, because they've been arranging Yellow Vest events for 2 months now.
So then explain to me, why was he being harassed today by members of the Yellow Vest if he's a part of it?
There was 2 separate groups. Okay. So now let's get back to that. So are we now saying there are 2 separate Yellow Vest British groups? Today there was,
Today. Can we now talk about which ones they were? Which ones they were?
But then you've had James Goddard try to use that as a symbol, and then the French have come over from France and said that's not what we're about, and they're gone and stood with Owen Jones.
Oh, good. They're on the side of the good man. See?
Well, that's the matter.
So just to clarify, what are they called? What are the groups called?
Well, you have the French Yellow Vest movement. Now,
not the French one. I mean UK, in the UK. the
Well, you've
UK
got the
country.
People's Assembly, which often has stopped the war and generally works with Labour, and you know, Owen Jones is linked to that, and John McDonnell and all of those people. So it's a very much, I would say, hard left position. It's aligned with Mélenchon in France, and it's linked with the French Yellow Vest. And then you've had a handful of people promoted by rebel media who have been wearing yellow vest in London, literally about 8 people. And they've got no connection to the French Yellow Vest movement. They've just been trying to get some publicity out of it, and they don't share the same common ideas. The French Yellow Vest started
Exactly.
angry about the fuel prices had
No,
gone
it's
up.
not. That's a lie. They're angry about the immigration coming from Marrakesh. That's what they're angry about, because France did a deal with Morocco to have open immigration.
There are other issues that came
nothing to do with oil prices.
Okay, let's put the French one to one side. You've cleared up the British one, so now we know that there are 2 British yellow vests. So it's important to get this out. So when we talk about them, we know which one we're talking about, so we're not clashing. They're 2 separate ones. Okay.
You've got the People's Assembly is one group, which is left wing, and the other group you've got there James Goddard, and I don't know if you're aware of the people involved in that. You've got Timothy Scott,
yep,
who's been on the swastika waving Brian Roux show, which is basically a neo-Nazi radio show. He was set up a group, Liberty Defenders, with Jack Sen, who was kicked out of UKIP for anti-Semitism, was in the BNP, and so on.
Right.
You've had Kevin from the BNP with them, you know, so that's sort of got a lot of those characters in it. So it's kind of looks like a front for that. Looks like they're just trying to make a name out of the yellow vest. And then you've got the actual left-wing yellow vests aligned with those in France.
No, but okay, I see. Got it. Right. So they're called the People's Assembly, the left-wing yellow vests. Cool.
Yes, and the right-wing ones are Goddard.
I swear to God, everyone. Hey, Steve, have you given your breakdown on today's events? I don't know if I asked you earlier before everybody else came on, but I don't.
Yeah, no, I was first. Can't you remember?
Yeah, I thought so. I wasn't sure still. I just wanted to make sure. To make sure I didn't leave you out. You get me, Kai. Everybody else just went through.
I made an impact, clearly.
All right, cool, man. Yeah, you just want to get back into it still.
Yeah. So I don't know, where do you guys want to start from? Do you guys want to pick up from where you just left off, or can I introduce back? I think Hopsky had something he wanted to say about the Labour Party, and I think Julia definitely wanted to disagree with him on that.
No, they were disagreeing about what the French yellow vest stood for. Jarina believes it had to do with Marrakesh, whereas Luke was talking about Emmanuel Macron's policies.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Even in France, there has been some far-right protesters that try to take the left, the yellow vest for their purpose. They have protests against immigration. The main part of the protest has been against the policies of Macron, and including the fuel price rises and etc.
I mean, the main gist of today's protest was call for a general election. That's what today's main mantra was about, was for a general election, because the Tory government, in all their ineptitude, have failed to follow up on the vote of the referendum. That was the main gist. They want a general election. They want the people to vote them into power.
Yeah, being there on the scene, I mean, people chanting Tories out, immigrants in. What were some of the other chants that you remember hearing, Sky?
Yeah, it's mostly Tories out, immigrants in. General election now. A call for a people's vote in terms of Remain. Enter austerity, no more cuts. These were the types of mantras and chants, basically. But it's definitely a big amount in terms of calling.
Let's say what Steve was airing with the people that he was on.
Never made it on TV. Scattered.
It was when it was on COE. Man, don't listen to BBC.
Only yours, yeah.
It's going to be very limited TV coverage because the BBC is very neoliberal. So it would have like David Cameron or Tony Blair, because they were in the middle politically. But it is not going to give much coverage to Corbyn because he's out further to the left politically, and it's going to ignore anyone truly on the right as well, because most of the media is neoliberal.
And what, Luke, you're on the right yourself, right?
Yeah, in a sense. I don't think I'm quite. It depends what you mean by right. I'm not economically that right wing in a sense, because I don't support Ayn Rand, but and I want to.
I ain't got a front. Like I said, ain't that politically aware. I'm trying to up my political
Ayn
level
Rand
still.
was a capitalist, a free market capitalist.
But
Ayn Rand was a psychopath.
But I ain't gonna front. I was surprised in the tone that I hear you talking about James Goddard and them. I get the impression that you don't like them.
Well, they did offer to kill me, so
I didn't know about that. Still, what's that about? Because from the outside looking in, from the outside, sorry, before you go on, from the outside looking in, I thought that you was all in the same camp, because you got the Make Britain Great Again hat. I see a red cap boy walking around with the same one. They waving the British flags and all of that.
Buy one of those hats. Anybody can buy those hats.
Can I say something? Can I interject, please?
No,
Can I interject?
No, Hopsy, calm down.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, go on. Luke, tell me about the death threats and all of that. That's all news to me.
Well, anybody can buy one of those hats. It doesn't mean that they speak for me or vice versa. And those hats all over eBay. They're not even necessarily sold by me. I think the hat you're referring to actually says Trump 2020. It's a different slogan to my hat. I mentioned to you earlier about this chap Timothy Scott, who's been on the Brian Roux show where they wave the Nazi swastika. That is literally a Nazi show. I'm not a Nazi. I'm an old-fashioned kind of Tory, not like David Cameron, but more of an old-fashioned kind, where I believe in family values. I want to preserve the sort of Christian values. And I also don't really follow the far-right economic position. I'm more sort of absolutist economic libertarianism, but I'm more into a paternalistic position. I actually believe we should look after and help the community, and I want to have economic terror. So I'm very different to all of that. I don't support any kind of national socialism at all. It's a terrible ideology.
But what makes you think men will look after society? You haven't done a good job so far.
Drina, I beg you, let him finish his explanation of what he's about.
I wasn't talking about that. I'm talking about paternalistic conservatism means that you have an obligation to help the poor in your community. It's nothing to do with male power.
Paternalistic, men. No, they have never cared about anyone but themselves.
If we go back to what I was actually mentioning, so you've got people like Timothy Scott who've been on that neo-Nazi show, and I was contacted by Goddard, said he's having this rally, can I please come along? And then I find out that this Timothy Scott's going to be speaking, so I politely pulled out, and the response was to make a burn one of my hats. So I don't think there's any link there between me and him, and to also offer to set me on fire. So
James Goddard said that.
Scott made 2 videos offering to slit my throat. So I think it would be rather disingenuous of anyone.
Because you didn't want to get on a panel with who was the guy's name?
Timothy Scott, who's been on Nazi radio shows. So yeah.
Okay.
I don't think we're the same politically.
And what we're saying is it common knowledge that this guy's been on Nazi radio shows?
Yeah, and you can find the show. He has still got it on his page. He hasn't taken it off his Facebook page, and James Goddard knows this.
Yeah.
Still hanging out with him, so
can I
make the conclusions?
Can I speak? If you ask me, in my opinion, the likes of James Goddard and Danny Tomo, these guys are idiots. Yeah, they are first class fools of the highest degree. But what strikes me as blatant hypocrisy is that the left have been slandering people like Farage and all of his ilk, etc., as Nazis and fascists and blah, blah, blah. But when they are given a taste of their own medicine, they go into meltdown. the media going to melt down, and everyone that is associated with them, it's people end up getting arrested because they have a point of view, and that strikes me as total and utter hypocrisy.
I see your point, but I think
Subaru isn't left wing, is she?
that's not why he got arrested, is it? That's not the real reason he got arrested. Because have you not seen the video where he goes up to an Asian policeman and says that he thinks he's not British?
As I said, I think these people. I think
tells him that he thinks he's fair game and that he wants to fight him. Have you not seen that? That's why he got arrested.
I haven't seen it. And to be honest with you, it's not. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. But
Luke, why did it take 4 days?
Brexiteers are like idiots.
Luke, why did it take the police 4 days to arrest him when police were actually present? Well, that's
a very good question. That's a very good question, and I don't have the answer, but that is a good question.
Does that not lead you to think that it's actually a lot more than that moment?
Well, I haven't seen everything he's ever done in his life, so I can't know if he's done anything since.
I mean, I
believe he was invited to go down. Well, he claims he was invited to go down to Hopeburn police station, and suppose it's going to be that midday. Maybe that was about Wednesday or Sudbury, but why they then came over and arrested him, I don't know. And the footage is very odd. It's as if he was waiting for them to come over. That doesn't make sense. I don't quite know what's happening there. How do you know in advance that the police are going to cross the road and arrest you? How does that work?
He might have seen them coming.
I don't know.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you are accused of a crime, yeah, you're not going to be arrested instantly, because you go to the police station and you say, "Hello, Mr. Police Officer. Someone has offended me," and they say, "Okay, who was this person?" And they give the details and they act accordingly.
So you think it's because Bercow kicked off in the House of Parliament?
Oh, big time! His arrest was led by Parliament, without doubt.
Exactly.
Well, they can comfortably probably walk in and out. I think there's one point in one of the videos where it gets a bit awkward, where somebody is actually standing in front of the gate into Parliament. That's probably not very clever. But I think just even shouting at the MPs, whichever party they are, like that, is going to make them feel uncomfortable. And
okay, so it's perfect. It's perfectly fine for them to shout.
Let me finish the sentence, please. They've done it twice to Subi. So the thing is, if you do it once, that's technically legal. But if you do it twice and you've been told not to, and you do it a second time, that is actually harassment, which is a civil matter.
So, okay, it's perfectly fine for these politicians to stand up in Parliament and cast aspersions against all kinds of people, but when those aspersions, when them aspersions are cast back upon them, they get sand in their vagina. Have a word.
The far left have been screeching and screaming at people saying that they're racists and Nazis.
I don't approve of the far left doing it either.
Nigel Farage, yeah, exactly. It's not
the way that whatever someone thinks of Farage's political ideology, I personally think very highly of him. But and if someone thinks that's awful, well, it's much better than some of these other people we've mentioned. But I think that the way he was treated was in Edinburgh when they blocked him into a pub and they wouldn't let him out, and his family were there, his wife and his children, and his children quite young then. That was terrible.
Awful, and the way Farage was treated is absolutely awful. It's not good.
Thank you, Steve. Exactly.
But should it be criminal? And then if this is
no,
Farage is criminal. They threw an egg at him, though that happens to a lot of politicians. But that's certainly criminal, and someone should have been charged for that. And I think blocking him in the back of a pub with his children probably is sort of holding someone hostage. That's sort of false imprisonment, really.
So basically, what we have is significant inconsistency of how these sorts of things are dealt with.
Well, yeah, someone shouts someone who may or may not, depending on your opinion, be a bit of a thug, shouts at Subri, and it clearly has been rather aggressive, and I think she would feel intimidated. She's surrounded by a bunch of young lads. She's probably not quite sure what they're going to do next. But
it's called karma. It's called karma, my friend.
Yeah,
it's kind of karma.
Hey, I'm not. You seem to think I'm always disagreeing with you. I'm just making a point. So
Look at
her, and that makes her feel really uncomfortable. But on the other hand, people can egg Farage, and they can actually lock him in a building and somehow.
I don't think the woman was even uncomfortable. Look at her face; she's smiling, she's grinning throughout it all. She's a resilient, strong woman. She's not some wafy little woman that can't handle stuff. This has been turned into a political matter.
Maybe she was putting a brave face on it, and far be it from me to defend LFC from the Conservative Party. But let me just change the nature of the topic for a bit, and let me ask Hopsky this question that I'm sure you're like, I mean, don't you think Jeremy Corbyn, with his starts against big corporation and big business, could possibly be the answer that Britain needs to all the issues that's going on right now?
No.
No chance.
No chance, because Jeremy Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn is a very dangerous man. Yeah, Corbyn is a terrorist sympathiser. It is well documented through all social media and the internet. Yeah,
well,
let me speak. Listen,
it's valid what you're saying, but that's not what he asked you. He asked you about business, didn't he?
Jeremy Corbyn has no idea about business. Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn is a socialist, and we all know full well that socialism is a failed ideology when it comes to economics and running of business.
What evidence do you have? Give us an evidence. Some
right.
Case
okay.
Studies.
Go Google. Yeah. Go Google all countries that are run by socialism, and Venezuela would be the pinnacle of that, because look at the state of that country. Socialism is a failed ideology.
Couldn't I argue that capitalism and the current ideology that we have right now is a failed one, and it proved that back in 2008 when the economy crashed and it had to run to socialism to bail it out of its.
That's not
right. Okay, let me answer that. Yeah. Prior to the 2008 recession, the Labour government were in charge of this country's business, and it failed dramatically. It failed, and the Labour government prior to 2008 left a big mess in terms of finance and economics. They ruined us, and they left.
Yes, but the same thing happened in 1992 under the Tories. We had an economic depression under the Tories in 1992.
Yeah.
And we also had an economic depression in the 80s under Margaret Thatcher, the Tories. So it works both ways.
You're ignoring a few things here. So what you keep comparing Corbyn to Tony Blair, which doesn't work, because Tony Blair was the third way. What happened was you had both Labour and Tories came to the centre, and that's why Cameron is very similar. Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, they're all very similar, and people get very frustrated because all the political parties, including Lib Dems, are in the middle, and that's why you saw rise UKIP on the right as a right-wing populist movement. You saw on the left the infiltration of Corbyn taking over Labour, which is completely different ideology to that of Tony Blair. It's basically a different party now because that's left-wing populism. So you're not making that distinction at all. The real reason we have this constant issue, whether it's Tory, whether it was Blair, of this recession is because of the political system which favours the bankers, and so they're just putting us all constantly into credit, and then it crashes. That's really what happened there. Our whole economic system is based on credit. It's all based around tax havens. And I would not vote for Corbyn, but he has acknowledged the tax havens, to be fair. And the biggest problem we have at the moment is places like Google is based in Ireland, so we're not getting tax money off them, so that doesn't benefit us. We should acknowledge that off them as well, if we're to be fair.
Apple.
But you can't ignore the fact that even if Jeremy Corbyn did come into power, there would be a major problem within the Labour Party, because the majority of the Labour Party MPs are Blairites, and so they would be against a lot of what Jeremy Corbyn is doing.
There's an even bigger problem. Whoever came into power, whoever they were, left or right, and I don't think you have to be left wing to challenge the banks. If someone was a traditional conservative, they would challenge the banks as well. Whoever they are, if they want to challenge the banks. The banks have so much power. How is anyone possibly going to be in a position to do that? Look what happens to countries like, I don't like the man, but Robert Mugabe tried to challenge the banks. That didn't go on very well.
It didn't go too well for him at all.
Yeah, well, I'm Zimbabwean, so I do know a lot about that. Vladimir Putin, it didn't work out very well when he challenged the banks as well. Everyone's trying to demonize him. And a lot of the attacks against him make absolutely no sense. They're entirely political. So he's called a homophobe because of some laws they have there, which, whatever you think of those laws exist in many countries throughout the world in gay marriage, and those countries are never crucified. He's being singled out because he's challenged the banking system.
So Luke, shouldn't we support Corbyn then?
No, I'm not going to support Corbyn because there are the facts that this chap Hopsky has mentioned, such as that he's showed sympathy for the IRA, which I don't agree with. He hasn't really spoken out very strongly for Brexit. He wants to allow fake refugees into the country. And he also wants to have a policy which is very hard left, where he wants to have state control of industry. I would agree to some extent, but not as far as he wants, because I would allow, or I would support, rather, it's not my decision, but it's the public's decision, but I would support state ownership of the railways, because there's no natural monopoly. It hasn't worked. This fake privatization we've had that's just benefited a few MPs' friends. But I don't want to have the degree of ownership that people who support communism would have over that industry. I still want people to have the freedom to set up businesses and to better themselves in life.
We're making an assumption that if there was an election, Jeremy Corbyn would win. Have we taken into the consideration that he might not win, and that we could end up with something more like what happened when you had David Cameron and what's his name, the guy who was the leader of the Liberals, the coalition? Yes, when you had the coalition. So it might not be a clear-cut victory for Labour.
Well, that's probably very likely, but I don't know if they would make the coalition with the Tories, because the Tories are seen, though they're not truly for Brexit, they are seen that way, whereas the Lib Dems have had a lot of funding from Lord Sainsbury's to campaign for Remain, so they might end up aligning more with Corbyn. I don't know.
Yeah, because I don't see it being too clear-cut like a Labour victory. I see a lot of division in the electorate, what they want to vote for and what they don't want to vote for. So I don't think loads of people would vote for Labour, basically. I don't. But I think Brexit will take place.
Surge. I think we might be about to see a massive surge for Lib Dems.
Lib Dems, all right.
We could end up with a hung parliament.
Well, I think that's what was being said. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Jeremy Corbyn will win the election, and we will have a strong Labour government. And I honestly think Jeremy Corbyn will probably be one of the best prime ministers this country could probably ask for. He starts from his bank. He starts from his bank.
Sorry. With all due respect,
Starts from the back, starts on war, and it starts.
Is that because I emigrate? Is that why he'd be so amazing?
I mean, if you emigrate, that might add to it, but I'm not sure.
Scattered minds. You do know that the majority of his colleagues are against him, so it will be very hard for him to push what he really believes. It'll be like the early 90s when you had John Major in charge of the Tory party, and most of the Tories didn't like him, and he was always struggling to push through what he wanted to do.
Through what he wants to do. I'm not being like conspiracy theory land here, but I honestly think if he ever got into power and tried to implement his policy, I'm sure that the secret services, I'm not condoning this or asking for it, but I think they'd arrange a car accident, because you have to be serious here, because what you're looking at here is he's saying that he wants to challenge the tax havens, these treasure islands like Bermuda, where they've been putting away a lot of dodgy money. That's drug money and African warlords' money and stuff that's been stored over there. And Britain makes a lot of money out of that. That's the basis of our economy.
Do you people know how much money?
You don't think it's a good thing that Jeremy Corbyn wants to tackle the fact that Britain are making...
I didn't say that. I didn't say that it's not a good thing. And I don't think you have to be Jeremy Corbyn to want to challenge that. A lot of people want to challenge that across the political spectrum. But
really?
The point I'm making is if someone tries to challenge that, what do you think the banks are just going to let them do it? They'll probably end up being killed like JFK or someone.
I mean, I think that would be at least give the people a real insight to actually what the real issues in the society is, and actually allow people to realize all of this fighting over Brexit and all of this foolishness isn't the problem, because when you actually get a chance to actually challenge the banks properly, car accidents happen. So really, all of these arguments that you guys are having and fights and all the scuffles about Brexit and who controls the country, you're actually falling and playing into the trap, because when you have somebody who like Jeremy Corbyn who actually can challenge those actual real big powers.
You're just making everything into a single issue. There's multiple issues you have to consider when you elect somebody and when you want to solve a country. It's not just the financial issue. There are issues on the infrastructure has been affected by mass migration. People's concerns are valid.
For sure.
There are a lot of fake refugees coming in. People have valid concerns. And the biggest thing they're showing...
Sorry to cut you off, Luke, but don't you think, right, that immigration is coming in partially, especially from the African countries, precisely because Britain is allowing these tax havens and allowing a lot of British companies to actually scam a lot of African countries and actually keeping a lot of these dictators in power, because these dictators actually allow Britain to actually...
Britain is scamming Africa. The warlords running these countries are the ones scamming them. And they're quite happy for someone to support them.
One second, so the warlords are scamming them, and Britain are quite happy to take the money in. But are you saying British business has not and does not continue to benefit from these warlords being in place?
I wouldn't say as much as the warlords do, because they're the ones living in absolute luxury. Banks across the world. You don't think the fact that we get cheap... I'm asking you questions and you're going out the back door. Let me just make it very clear. You don't think the fact, right, that our economy benefits massively? You're saying that this one person, this group of dictators are the ones who benefit, but our economies in the West massively benefit from the fact that we are able to dominate and subjugate those third world countries, and that we've had people like Mark Thatcher and so on who go to these countries and actually try and start third world wars. We sell them weapons. We get their oil. Tony Blair. That's not just Tony Blair started the war as well.
Resources at cheap rates, and we get all of these things based on the fact that a lot of these people are in power. So the fact is that the reason why the immigrants are coming into the Europe and that you don't want them to come into is actually because the West policies in those countries are actually creating poverty.
Well, no, there's lots of successful countries outside of Europe, such as Malaysia and so on, but there is an international elite. That includes people within Africa. There are actually rich people in Africa. There's a lot of rich people in South Africa. There are some rich people in Nigeria. But there is a rich international elite, and they're storing money and tax havens to benefit themselves. And that is at the disadvantage of people, not just outside Europe, but even in Europe. People in Europe are suffering as a result. There are areas of Wales where there's mass unemployment. There are areas of the north of England where there's mass unemployment because we don't have any infrastructure. There's no manufacturing because we have this service-based economy.
Luke, you're right. Can I just I'm going to say this. I'm going to sleep, but I will say this: 70% of the world's money and wealth comes through London and the Cayman Islands.
Well, it's Cayman, Bermuda, tax.
Where is your source for this? What source?
I will get it for you. 1 second. I will get it for you.
Google it. There's loads of information on this. There's loads of information out there. It's the whole basis for our economy. The American economy is based on oil. That's why we're always in the Middle Eastern oil war. The whole system throughout the whole world is corrupt.
Right, cool. While Hopsky is getting the information and on your point on the whole system being corrupt, exactly, and the West benefits massively from this corruption. The West actually goes to war to keep this system in place over and over again. The West actually involves itself in coups.
It's not just the West. Saudi Arabia is very deeply involved. Dubai is very deeply
The
involved.
West runs Saudi Arabia, bro. Like all of those countries there.
People say it's the other way around, but
it's definitely not the other way around. Those guys there, they take their.
There's a very mutual relationship, I think, between America, Britain, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Dubai, all these countries.
But you can see who the senior and who the junior partners are.
Qatar owns parts of the French government. You know, that's how powerful they are. Lots of businesses in this country are owned by Middle Eastern companies. Qatar, is it Qatar? I think owns Harrods. The actual government buildings in the UK that are owned by companies in the Middle East. So I think it's a very intertwined because they have the oil over here. People want the oil, but the City of London is the focal central point.
Okay, how does this help how does this affect the whole yellow vest situation in the UK? I'm just trying to see what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months.
What they should be protesting against, but I don't think their message is very clear. In fact, those leaflets they were handing out today said that they...
Whose message? Which one? The People's Assembly or the Goddard one? Which vest are you talking about?
Either of them are clearly targeting this, so the People's Assembly somewhat are, but the Goddard ones, I don't think they really know what they're standing for other than a bit of YouTube publicity. The leaflets they were handing out today, I don't know if this is genuine, but it's circulating on Facebook. It looks to be genuine. A leaflet saying support of child abuse, so very bad grammar there. So I don't think that, I think the leaflet was meant to say the opposite, but I don't think their message is very clear or nuanced. I don't think there's very strong leadership.
Okay. All right. So basically what they've done today isn't going to make a blind bit of difference to what Theresa May will decide for the deal.
Well, the people today protesting were mostly pro the EU. The people protesting today were mostly pro the EU. The majority of those people were not supporting James Goddard. They were supporting Owen Jones.
Yeah, they were the People's Assembly, as you were saying.
So they are pro EU. They don't want Brexit. But as I don't think protests will make a big difference. The miners' strikes didn't take down Thatcher, so I don't.
No, it didn't. Yeah, neither did the protest against Tony Blair against the Iraq War. Yeah, it didn't make a difference. No.
I mean, what's going to happen for sure, though, is this protest wasn't going to make a difference. No, what's going to happen is on Tuesday there will be a vote in Parliament on Theresa May's deal. It's very likely that Theresa May's deal is going to be voted down and she's going to lose. What could possibly happen then is Labour will try and push for either a vote of no confidence in the government, or they will try and push for a general election. And so this protest, really, by the People's Assembly, was really pretty much setting the groundwork for those the next few days in terms of if Labour are going to call an election or if they're going to call for a vote of no confidence in Theresa May. I think they're really just trying to shake Theresa May up, or shake the Conservatives up and shake them into worrying and to making a mistake, because that's all the Labour Party really can do in this position in terms of effective opposition.
If I could go back to mentioning Africa, I do think that what we see is something similar to what happened. I'm not going to want people to jump to conclusions with this. I don't think is the slave trade, but there is a similarity where you had this terrible collusion between selfish business people from the West and certain African chieftains who are happily selling their own people. And I think we see a similar situation with the collusion between bankers and the other 1%. They're not the majority of people.
I mean, look. In many ways, in the African Caribbean community, in an African community, many people feel like that sort of situation never really ended, and that what happened was after the end of slavery, you had a period of colonization, and after colonization, you went into a post-colonial era where you had a lot of independence leaders who actually did try and actually do good things for their countries. Many of them were overthrown very quickly in faux coups and assassinations which the British government have since admitted to being involved in, at least one of them, the killing of Thomas Sankara. And actually, I think they've also admitted to playing a role in the removal of Kwame Nkrumah from power, and the people who replaced these leaders were the people who were going to stay in the power for the next 10, 20, 30 years and become dictators and actually give the West quite good deals in a lot of these countries.
Well, it's more complex than that, I think, because you had, during the Cold War, you had Russia literally sending in East German and Russian soldiers to back people in Angola and Mozambique. You had the Western forces as well trying to influence different countries.
Yeah, for sure. There was definitely
and some of these economies have, to be fair, failed because of bad economic policies, if we're to be honest, but others at times have been actually intervened into by European powers. And I think of greater significance would be France than Britain in this, because all of the French-speaking African countries, central bank for those respective countries goes through the French central bank. Britain didn't do that, but France does that. So France still controls the economy for all of the French-speaking African countries. And if they don't comply with the rules put down by France, they take a very different position to Britain. Britain didn't go in and shoot Mugabe when he fell out with the banks. They left him there. But what happens with France is you get someone who was formerly in the French Foreign Legion goes rogue and shoots the president.
Sorry, I missed that last part.
There are incidences where guys who are in the French Foreign Legion have gone rogue and shot an African president. It's hard to think this is a coincidence.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is what I'm saying. The West definitely has played these sorts of roles all across Africa and continue to do it, because the reality of the matter is, and this is something that
is beyond Africa. This
of course, beyond Africa. But sorry, 1 second, Luke. We're talking about Luke, for 1 second. Let's chill. We're on Africa for now, so let's stay on Africa for chill for 1 second, yeah. So the West does this in Africa, and the reason why the West does this in Africa, and the reason why a lot of people don't actually look into it and acknowledge it, is because if you have to actually give Africa a fair deal, if these corrupt leaders weren't in there swindling their own people and allowing the West to get good deals off of them, what would happen is the West would have to pay a lot more, higher rates and higher prices for the resources which the West actually depends on. So when we're talking about the minerals that go into our mobile phone batteries, into our laptops, into many of our smartphones, when we're talking about oil, and we're talking about diamonds, and we're talking about gold, or we're talking about like uranium, and a lot of these resources, maybe not uranium actually, but a lot of these resources, they come directly from Africa. And if we have to pay for, and when we talk about things like cocoa, coffee, and all these sorts of things, and if we have to actually stop abiding by World Trade Organization rules, which are slanted in the West's favor, then the West actually comes a cropper, and the West actually suffers economically. And so it's actually in the West's favor to keep all of this corruption in Africa. And so it's very easy for us. One second. So it's very easy for us in the West to sort of say, oh, it's all because of corrupt African leaders, and to take all agency away.
No, I never said that, did I? I never said that.
And to take all agency away from the West. But to take a more nuanced position, you're going to say, actually, this world system that we have actually is actually perpetuated by the West. It's actually pushed and enforced by the West. And a lot of these leaders in Africa,
the West implies that
a lot of these leaders in Africa are actually benefiting off of a crooked system that the West actually wants to keep and actually pushes.
When you say the West, it implies that Theresa May is the mastermind or something. When this is a lot higher up. This is the elite 1%.
Why would you say
they dominate the whole of the world to its disadvantage? You know, England has been damaged. The north of England lost its manufacturing. Communities closed down in Wales when they shut the mines. This is the whole of the world that the bankers are abusing. It's not limited to one place. And I never said it was Africa's fault by itself. I have acknowledged that the banks were involved, just as they were involved in the slave trade. This is, I think, people throughout the whole world are victim of the banking system.
Exactly, but our governments and our governments here in the West, particularly, fight very hard, tooth and nail, for those banks, and actually put those banks before their own populations.
Well, they're owned by the banks, aren't they? Even the political parties are owned by the banks. Everything throughout the whole world is owned by the banks, including the intelligence agencies. And this is the problem. How do you take on this banking system when they own everything?
Well, I mean, first of all, probably by not playing into their hands on these small,
IMF.
Maybe not by not playing into their hands on these small issues on things like Brexit, and perhaps by actually saying, you know what,
well, Brexit is people with frustration, isn't it?
have all united against this one guy called Jeremy Corbyn. Let's actually try to annoy the system and see what happens when he gets into power. Maybe he might be the worst thing, but actually what we know is the banking system right now is actually the worst thing for us. And right now they hate this one politician. They seem to be fine with every other politician who might get into power, but this one particular guy called Jeremy Corbyn.
We're just taking on the banks by itself is not enough for a manifesto. So we've got a guy here who's sympathetic towards terrorists, who wants an open border. You know, we're going to have such a security nightmare. You've got someone like Diane Abbott who wants to pay the police £3,000 a year. It would just be chaos and anarchy. So it wouldn't matter if we challenge the banks. See, the thing is, if you're going to challenge the banking system, what are you going to put in its place? So if you take out the service-based industry we've got, and we haven't got any manufacturing left, what is the British economy going to be?
So use a stick up in. I like the conversation still, but yeah, I got speakers calling in the morning, you know, so
yeah, I'm
going to be wrapping up this thing soon. I'm going to let you make your closing statements.
Okay.
Yeah, and basically, yeah, about 10 more minutes, and then man's looking to close down the show still. I'm doing some editing right now, trying to get some of those interviews up.
Oh no.
Yeah, that we filmed.
Any of the no.
We got a good few. We got a couple good interviews. I like Sky.
Yeah, we got some good ones, man. I'm looking forward to it.
What's the main one? What's that guy's name? I don't know. See, my political awareness is so whack.
We interviewed John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor, the next Chancellor of the Exchequer. I interviewed him before he was setting the tax laws, just so everybody knows. Yeah, he's the second most powerful person in the Labour Party. So yeah, it was a good interview.
Let me ask you this: so like, there's a serious problem if companies like Google are being cheeky. The EU actually allows this to happen, but let's not get into the Brexit argument. Let's avoid that for now. Let's say Google's putting all this money. They're operating through Ireland, so they can skip paying tax in the UK. So there's a lot of money that the 1% should be paying that they don't pay, and then the middle class are expected to pick the bill up, and so they feel squeezed.
Yeah.
And I think they've got a right to feel squeezed because now they're working hard, getting a degree and stuff, and they're not
the working classes
they can't afford to buy a house. So, like nobody can get a mortgage. I get why people are feeling upset whether they're middle or working class, but Google and people are not paying their tax. So how do you make them pay that tax without them moving the business out of the country?
Well, I mean, for me, this is one of the fundamental issues behind Brexit is the world is more global, very much because of the economic desires of the West, and because it's a lot more global, it allows for companies and businesses like Google to do this. And so I think it's kind of nonsensical to leave the EU and then expect to be allowed to or expect to be able to actually counteract the powers of corporations. I think actually the world. I think the world actually needs to go towards a lot more regionalism and a lot more regional powers, and that way it'll be a lot more difficult for a company like
how does that work? Because the reason that they can have a company based in one country but operating in another is because of the regional setup, because it's two countries.
And so you need regional regulation across the board, because if you have, because I mean, this is a company that works through the internet, right? So regardless of whether Google is set up here or not, or Amazon set up here or not, a lot of their business will actually take place here, except for they'll be able to say our servers are somewhere else. If you have a regional government and say, yo, wherever your servers are, the place where you are making your economic transaction is where you're going to pay the tax, and we're going to enforce that as a global body. And if as a regional body, unless you don't pay your due tax in Britain, then you're not going to be able to trade anywhere in this world.
They didn't do it, did they? The EU hasn't done it, and it's been there for 50 years or something.
This is why I think the EU needs to take a lot more of perhaps a left-wing view and approach. And let me be clear, I'm a Pan-Africanist myself, and my views are more.
At the moment, to be honest with you,
it's very right-wing. It's very, very right-wing.
EPP are in charge of the EU at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, they are pretty much a centre-right party. I mean,
so you think Young's not really that right-wing, is he?
He's centre-right.
Really
like a Blair. They're from that same sort of, soft Blair academy of, third-way politics.
That is true. He is similar to Blair economically.
But anyway, yeah, content needs to get to bed. So do I. So let's wrap this up.
Okay.
It's been good talking to you, Luke, as well. First time talking, but
okay. You as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any last comment?
Yeah, and anything, any last words you don't want to add in? I ain't seen you at the park for ages, Luke. We saying you don't go down there no more, you don't intend to go back?
Oh, no, I'll try and get back down there. So yeah, just hard to try and do everything, but yeah, I'll try and get myself back down there.
Cool. Well, hopefully, when we do more political discussions, it'll be good to have you on, get your perspective on things.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can keep these type of shows running. You get me? Educating the people, letting them know about politics and that, man.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah. So you make your last statements. I'm gonna wrap up afterwards, man.
All right, cool. Yeah. For me, yeah, I think it was a good day today. I enjoyed it. Especially being able to actually kind of view it as being impartial as an interviewer for content over everything. But also as a Pan-Africanist, like keeping it to myself, but actually just watching it as a Pan-Africanist and seeing it play out. And yeah, I mean, definitely gonna do a little live on my own channel in the next few days, just giving my views from a Pan-Africanist perspective on it. Well, I've tried to give you guys some of it here in this conversation here. But yeah, I think yeah, I mean, it's just been a good build in general. I think the Yellow Vest needs to get a bit more aggressive if they want to make a change, and that'll be my one bit of advice. But yeah, other than that, big up content over everything. Keep doing the good work, man, and bringing the news.
Respect, bro.
Yeah.
All I have to say is, no matter what political decision is done, my life won't change for the better or for the worse. So, in all sense and purposes, I'm completely indifferent to the whole Brexit Remain thing. It won't make me richer and it won't make me poorer. So it's pointless getting heated about it. That's all I have to say.
Big up, Preston. Thanks for coming on, man.
Just thank you very much for letting me come on your show, and
thank you for inviting me on, Leon. Thank you.
I wish you a good evening.
All right, then that's everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. We out, man. See you tomorrow. Speakers Corner, morning business. Yeah, that's it. We done. It's a wrap.